Why can't we have tested and untested lifters in the same meet? If you have 15 untested lifters and 30 tested lifters, why can't they compete in the same meet? Why can't we just lump them all together and they just have their own divisions? Because that's really all it is.
All those people train different. All the people now train different. So how are you going to be able to train different to maximize your own potential?
He had it. Doesn't matter if it's for 30 seconds. It doesn't matter if it's for 3 hours. It doesn't mean if it's 30 years. A champion's a champion.
It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest is Michael Greeno. I'm going to introduce you the way that you are noted on Instagram because I think it is the best that I saw looking through there. So engineer, coach, father, and part-time voice of reason. And there's the Lego thing, but I kind of left the Lego thing out.
Yeah.
Don't know how much we'll speak about Legos. All I know about them is stepping on them in the middle of the night. Hurts like a bitch.
Yes, they do.
So anything I left out of that?
No, I don't believe so. I try to keep that all encompassing.
Yeah.
I keep the DM for inquiries like very, very at the bottom because it's like half the time I don't need that.
Well, I will put in there that you've been a competitive power lifter forever. I think your first meet was like in 91. I mean, we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
And have been coaching more and more over the years.
Yeah.
And coach multiple top lifters, world record holders, and so forth. So most of this will kind of evolve around the coaching and the training and how powerlifting has progressed over the years.
Yeah.
And all those other things. So there's one comment that you made that I want to jump off with, and that is records will come and go, but memories will be forever. If you walk away from all of this, all you have is the memories. So protect those memories, protect those people that impact it.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that a little bit.
Man, you see it a lot. Again, I started this when I was 13, and the person who brought me in this sport, he's a 65-year-old guy, bench only. His name was Don, had world record holder. Like he was a world record holder, had, probably fed records. I never really asked at the time. There's no way of corroborating that other than like Soong's list and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And his take on it was, you're not ever going to keep these things forever. You hear the whole adage, strength is rented, and eventually you're just going to have to give these things back, or you're going to have to pass them down, or something to that effect. All you have is your convictions, you have your beliefs, and what you feel like what you did in the sport, and whether or not you made an impact on the things you did. So the people you helped, the things you did, the records are great, but they come and go. Right? It's what kind of champion were you, and how did you serve that time at the top, and what did it mean? Because you can be, multiple time champion, but what if you're a complete asshole about it? Then who cares? They're just going to remember you for that. They're not going to remember, oh yeah, cool, they were strong, but how many times did you hear that they were strong but they were a dirtbag?
Yeah.
Right. How many times have you've seen or heard about that, So when you sit there and you have them, they come and go. It's like most people are like, thank God someone else has that record now, because that person that had it before it, like, didn't deserve it because they felt some sort of way about that person. Right. So the sport has always been, what have you done for me lately? In a really weird way. Right. People kind of come and go in the amnesia that powerlifting has, right? You take a person who kind of fell off the face of the earth, and then they kind of go back into the whole thing. They lose their records, and then they kind of seem to be forgotten. And I've had those conversations with a lot of high-end lifters and stuff in the past where they're like, they lose their record. They're like, well, I don't really matter anymore. I'm like, does any of this, like, are you hearing what you're saying? Because no one can take away that time that you were a world record holder. yes, people were taking it. Yeah, you want people to take it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like JP Price, when he broke the all-time world record total, he had it for 3 hours. It was the craziest conversation. It was me, JP, Jeff Frank, Ben Moore. It was our original crew. And he's like, I think I can do it, but I have to do it here and I have to do it now. He's like, do you think we can do it? And we're like, why not? We only got one shot to do it, because 3 hours later, Ray Williams was going to compete and solidify his legacy as one of the best lifters of all time. And so JP competes in the morning and Ray competes in the evening in prime time. And of course, Ray obliterates the record, of course, but JP had it for 3 hours.
Yeah.
He had it. You did it. Doesn't matter if it's for 30 seconds. It doesn't matter if it's for 3 hours. It doesn't mean for 30 years. A champion's a champion. So just know that it's going to come and go. It's the work that you did and the convictions you stood on that got you to that point is what mattered to most.
Yeah, I can, to go a little deeper in the weeds with that, the way that I kind of perceive it is there are certain ages that we have as lifters, or not ages, phases that we go through as lifters. And I don't want to say that, between 18 and 30 or whatever it's going to be, because it really, and we'll talk about this later, it really seems to be how many years you've been in it. But there's a certain point in time where you're in your prime.
Yeah.
Whatever that prime is going to be, for some people it'll be way higher than what other people are going to be. And when I saw that protect your memories, the way that I see that is, if we're to put a currency value on that and just think of how much, what is let's make it easy. Like, how much do you make for work, right?
Right.
And then take that out, figure the hours out, so forth. And with JP, for instance, with that squat, right? Let's put the currency value to that, of how many training sessions it took to be able to get there, right? And we got this very $100,000, who knows what it is, we could calculate the whole thing out, but that's a huge value, right? But when they're past that and they're into their next phase and they look back on that memory, that first off, it's one of the things that they're going to remember. But as some of these lifters get older and get through different phases, they start to look back and say things like, well, it really didn't matter. Nobody gives a shit, da, 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 da. But you do, right? And you paid a big price for that in exchange for that. So it's cool when you can go back and think, no matter what the memory is, if it's in a storage shed training with people 30 years ago, that's a memory that's in your mind that if you were flipping through an iPad, there's an image, there's an image, there's an image. And we can put a currency value to every one of those things. And each one of those memories are worth tens of thousands of dollars, if not more, to be able to put in there. And when they're in the later phases and look back, and that regret comes, or jealousy, or whatever it's going to be, that's the wrong way to look at it. The way to look at it is, out of all the memories you have, if you're 40 years old, 50 years old, 30 years old, all the memories you have looking back, it's not like you can sit down and write 100 of them out just like that.
Exactly.
Right. There's going to be like a top 20 that comes out real quick. Right. And with lifters that are in their own prime for that period of time, that's going to make up maybe 20% of those. That's a huge value that should be looked back on as, an accomplishment, learning experience, and so forth. And that's kind of where the passing on comes, because when you can help other people to be able to take, what we love so much and include that in what may be their 20%, when they look back, then that's more than just helping somebody get a better total or somebody get a better lift. Right. That's something that they may remember until the day they die. They may remember on their deathbed. And to be a part of something like that, to be able to help people to see that the same way that we have these memories going back, in our past. Right. It's a huge thing, man. It's a huge thing. And there's more gratitude, and it's more gratifying to look at it that way than to look at it as that record should be mine forever. Or, as I know that you've been around people as well, they can't get out of the past. It's like they think they can go back one last run or whatever it's going to be. And some people do.
Yeah.
Some people do.
For sure.
But as we know, most don't. And I think it's because they're not really valuing the memory the way that they should.
It's the Uncle Rico from Napoleon Dynamite, or it's the Al Bundy where he's still wearing his leather jacket and he's 40 years old, right? You're holding on to something that you hold valuable, but holds no value to anyone else, right? And at the end of the day, and I tell any client I have this, or I tell anyone, you better hold on to every bit of this, and you better make sure that it's something you value, because this sport's a wood chipper.
Oh yeah.
And you're going to go through it, and we're all going to go through it, and you're going to come out a bunch of mincemeat and mulch, or you're going to break the chipper itself and you're going to have a few broken arms, right? Either way, we all got to go through it if you're going to go on this journey, because you're all going to get hurt. You're all going to get beat up. If you're really going to commit to this, it requires a lot of belief. And a thing I say a lot lately is like, stand on your convictions, stand up for something, stand up for yourself, because no one else is going to do it for you. And the thing is because at the end of the day, as cliche as it is, when you step on that platform, like, that weight's not going to lift itself, right? It's going to expose something. It's kind of funny because Heidi was lifting last night, and she pulled, I think, 415. It was tough, but it wasn't like too tough. It wasn't dangerously slow. So let's go 425. And so I was like, show up to it. You better be committed to it, because if you don't, it's probably gonna be harder than it needs to be. And it was probably going to be harder than it needed to be anyway. But the moment, like, she got into it, she pulled it maybe about an inch off the ground and she set it back down. She's like, nope. It didn't even break the floor. And I'm like, the video says otherwise. I was like, you just weren't ready for it. You didn't want to do it. You didn't believe that you were going to do it. And you saw yourself out the door before you even tried to even walk through. Right. And I think a lot of people do that. And a lot of people with the, whether they break a world record, they kind of see their imminent demise as, well, there's no place to go. So I'm going to try to stay on top of this mountain as long as I can. And I'm going to defend it. Cool. Be in your prime and stuff there and do stuff. But understand, like, pass that baton with grace. There are a few people in this sport who have the ability to possess a record or possess prestige in such a way that it was always theirs. Ed being one of them, Chuck being one, Laura, John Hack, these people where Christy Hawkins, where it's like their record might be broke, but it's a rented record. And what I mean by that is that it's always theirs. Someone's going to come along, like, they're going to chill out for a while, but then someone's going to come along and maybe like bump it by a few kilos, but they're just going to be like, rinse due.
Yeah. And
they just come back and take it. And then that's just what they do their entire career until the wheels fall off, until they're just done. Right. And but there's so few people that do that.
Well, the interesting thing with that too is many, not all, but many, I'm choosing my words closely here. Fuck it. I'm just going to say many expect that everybody knows that they are the world record holder, right? Which is interesting to me because they don't know, outside of the person that broke it, that had it right before them, who had it 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but they're acting as if people should remember that they broke it 20 years into the future, but don't know who had it 20 years in the past, which has always been very intriguing to me with that. And now I believe the more world records people break, the less that mental philosophy fades.
True. But like in boxing, you have the lineal title. Who possessed that record. There's prestige to that. It's like, this is, Ed Cohn's record or Don Reinhardt's record or Kirk Kowalski's or whatever. The people who came before, whether it be, the ladies that kind of came from. The ladies, honestly, at this point, they're still solidifying that legacy, right? And I sit there and I say that with a great deal because there's so many that's like the rise of it's coming so much. So it's changing hands. And it's a nuclear arms race at this point. Like these ladies, it seems like it's changing every week, and the numbers are just, there's no limit to their things. So, but people don't know who the last generation of big lifters were. They don't even know the multiply lifters. They don't know the lifters from the 90s. It's crazy that some people, Heidi went with me to Powerlifting United Nationals last year. No one knows who she is. And it was like, she's like this completely different world to her. Yeah, they do multiply and do stuff like that, but she's one of the strongest women in that room. She's an all-time world record holder. She trained with under some of the best coaches ever to be in the sport. Yet she walks around with impunity. She's just known as my girlfriend because she's got a track jacket on. Right? Yeah. And you're like, oh, you must be Greeno's girlfriend. Like, she's a little bit more than that. And we can talk about her, but that's the thing, right? It's again, it's the, what have you done for me lately?
Well, do you think it's necessary that they know the history?
I think it's respectful. I think if you're a true steward of the sport and you're a true student and enthusiast of the sport, there are people that are out there that are just the nerds that love this sport and they love everything about it and they want to go back and they want to see things. Because the thing is, how do you change anything without seeing the past? Right? It's like everything's going to come back around full circle or something like that. But no, like you look at like the current state of things, it's all coming back around full circle. Like things are imploding back in on itself. Right. You had, the early days where everything was a power bar and all that good stuff. And then you started having specialty bars come in, squat bars, whatever. And then you had mass escalation with, when the F8 shirts started coming in and stuff. And now you start having bench bar, like more professed bench bars because it needed to hold 1,500 pounds now. Now you had an engineering problem, right? But then you had squat suits and stuff, and that was meant to just be protective. And they're like, oh, if we can keep this at one ply or whatever, then I can get a little more poundage out of it or something to that effect, right? So everything is invented out of necessity. And then you go into the raw era and, you had knee wraps and that was the way you went because that's what made most sense. No one's wanting to wear those blue reband knee sleeves, right? That's what the strongmen wear. And, you just got it from Jackal's Gym from Brad Gillingham. That's what you did. It was the only place you could get them at the time. But then, was it, at the time, it was like what Sam Bird went for 804 on that at Raw Unity, and then you have the entrance of the new generation knee sleeves. I've done reviews on all of them, all of the generation 3 sleeves that are basically this thick neoprene. It's like, oh, well, these are rubber. That's what neoprene is.
Yeah.
It's just bubbly rubber. There's multiple forms of it, right? And I was talking to a lot of the people who was creating them, vendors and stuff like that from different companies. I was like, do you guys not understand that like, this is what this is? You just thought it was just one thing, but it's all coming back around. It's just in a different iteration. Now you're seeing less specialty bars. You're starting to see like, you had the multiply area of escalation of all that stuff got crazy, but then it's like it imploded in on itself and got really simple with raw. And then they got hyper complex within itself. We didn't multiply the equipment that we wore. We multiplied the equipment that we use on the platform.
Yeah.
With deadlift bars.
Are you looking to extend your career in the gym? It's one of the questions that I'm asked most frequently. I'm Dave Tate from elitefts. When it comes to longevity in the gym, I look no further than the support gear that you're using. By support gear, this is one of our custom-made blockers, by the way, strength equipment, elitefts.com. I know a little bit about it. I've been doing this for 4 decades. So wrist wraps, straps, belts, knee wraps. There's so many different types of support wear out there that where we can help you the most is we only provide the stuff that's the best. So if you're looking to extend your longevity in the gym, head over to elitefts.com, top toolbar, power gear, hamburger blowout, power gear.
And stuff like that. We hyper engineer it to get more pounds. You know, we hyper engineer the knee sleeves.
This is something that I've thought about a lot. It's just kind of like as a hobby, trying to think through, you know, the progression of the sport and regressions of the sport, and from an equipment standpoint.
Right.
Because the progressions as far as participation is only increased exponentially, you know, so there's no question about that.
For sure.
But the aspect of the equipment has been very interesting because, you know, when I came in, it was, you know, only single ply. There were like, I was USPF because the APF may have just started.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it was. But then over a period of a few decades, you know, you have the multi-ply and even the single ply. But where I've kind of concluded and think I sit on this is as it's progressing, and if we use multiply, single ply, the same thing happened, but it didn't cost as much, but it still costed way more. So when I came in, a suit was like $20, right?
For sure.
Benchers came in a couple years later, maybe $40. And going back that many years, not that expensive, you know, saving lunch money for a couple weeks, and not a big deal.
Right.
Entry forms or meets were like $25, you know, stuff like that. Now, if we get to the height of multiply before Raw really started to kick off, and I'm sponsoring people, so I know what this is, you know, just to sponsor one person to be able to have backups was like $2,400 my cost for gear, because I wasn't making the gear, you know, so I'm a retailer of the gear. So then that's the cost of entry, you know. So if somebody wanted to jump in the sport, and multiply was never predominant, but let's say single ply is half that, right? Single ply would cost more actually over a period of 4 or 5 years because you got to replace, you know, so I think the cost gets to such this aggressive level that it becomes a deterrent because, you know, if I want to do this, it's going to cost as much as it costs to play hockey, you know, so what's the alternative? Raw comes back, well, I guess you could say came back, right? Because it started originally Raw.
Yeah,
You know,
say
so-
rose to prominence again. Yeah.
So it comes back, and now all of a sudden you need is $24 for a pair of the Reband knee sleeves and a belt. You know, so then,
Right.
But now what we're seeing, you know, with the more aggressive knee sleeves, and if you want to match the bar in training, there's 3 different bars. You know, now we're starting to click that price back up again. That's what I think. If we keep moving forward in this direction, you know, to where singlets start to become like single ply power singlets, which it's very close now with some that I've seen, you know, then we're right back to people are gonna, that financial aspect, which nobody really talks about, is like, I don't know if I want to do this. It costs $1,000 just to do my first meet, you know, and they got to add a coach and all this other stuff. So you have all these other factors, some good, some not so good, you know, but here we are again, where I wonder at what point is that tipping point to where it's going to regress back down and we're going to have bare knees, you know, before the Raw Unity, what was it? Record breakers, New England record breakers, whatever it was.
Right.
That's going to happen again. And then it's just history repeating itself.
And it is. And it's already started. It's already started. And it's great to see. And it's cool because it's being in this for so long. It's funny to go back to this. My first powerlifting meet was Sunlight Power. Entry fee was $15. Sunlight Power. I didn't squat to depth. He let me, it was a Daryl Latch was the guy.
Yeah.
He got that.
Yeah.
He let me continue to bench and I didn't know at the time, it was my first meet.
How old were you?
13. Signed a consent form. I had my mom sign a consent form and stuff like that. Right. And it was funny because like the guys at the gym, like I said, the guy Don, and then another guy named Dave Roberts, who wrote the sports pages for our local newspaper. You know, he was a big bencher, and then there was this other guy named Travis who was a surgical tech. They're like, yeah, kids, and it was like me and a couple buddies. Like we just, you know, we just did. Oh, I played sports, but then I just kind of found powerlifting like when I broke my ankle wrestling, and I needed something to do, so we just. And then we were just kind of looked like a bunch of idiots.
How'd you find the powerlifting though? Was it part of the school?
I was drugged. No, I mean, we did weightlifting in high school, but we went to a gym, a buddy of mine, his name is Steven, and we just started training at a little Globo gym, a local gym called Vessels. And Don and a couple of those guys, like, they're like, you guys look stupid. Like we're like squatting high, we're like doing Hatfield squats and stuff like that, and just we had no idea. We're just lifting weights. We're just a bunch of kids throwing plates. Like our mom signed release forms and stuff, and we looked like we knew what we were doing in the gym. Like we're both like pressing. You know, Steven at the time was pressing. You know, we were like pressing like 225 as like 13, 14-year-olds. Like we didn't have a problem with it. Like I think I benched 405 for the first time the day after I turned 17, right? It's just, and I've been doing it ever since, but because we just continue to lift. But like they pulled us aside. They're like, oh, I'm gonna show you powerlifting. You load my weights. So like, yeah, show us how to lift heavy and stuff like that. He's like, first off, you got to learn how to load weight. So like, we're just loading weights for them. We're loading their squat racks, we're loading their benches and stuff like that. But then they were just like giving us stuff to do. So it kind of took us on a wing. They like, hey, you want to go to a powerlifting meet? It's 2 hours away and stuff like that, to ask your mom. And that's what we did. Right. And so the cost of everything was so cheap for us. And I didn't know, like at the time, I didn't raw or anything. I just entered a division and I did it. Right. And it's like, I didn't know if I was in a drug tested division, untested. I didn't even know, you know, like the supplement store down the road and stuff like that was like, his name was Al. He would just tell us, yeah, don't take that. You can't take that. Cause at the time, you know, you can get everything on the shelf, you know, like literally there's a case of stuff. You like, I would tell people like some of the old things you get at like a GNC, like an old thing of Thermodrine. I remember was like 300 milligrams of caffeine and 25 milligrams of ephedrine in one pill.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. It's just like, and you hear that now, it's like, you are going to be geeked out.
Oh yeah. You're taking the handful.
That's like, you like a monster. It's like, oh yeah, 200 milligrams of caffeine. I'm like, please. Right. It's just, you didn't think about that stuff. And, you know, and keep in mind, like I'm growing up as a teenager in the steroid era of baseball. When baseball was good, when Sammy and Mark McGwire are just smashing home runs. I went to 60 games that year.
Oh, wow.
I lived in Rolla, Missouri. So like there was this grocery store, you know, like there's this grocery store that basically is like, hey, for $20, we'll just put you on a bus and we'll take you to Busch Stadium. I went to 60 games, I skipped school and stuff like that. My mom didn't know where I was at. I didn't care. But like to see all of that kind of come around and then travel through this, you know, these decades and then come back around, like I said, good to the point I was making is it's starting to happen again. Because now you have places like Abs, who is doing power bar on all three. They don't really care about weigh-ins or weight classes. You just kind of weigh in for your coefficient, but they just want your total and they want your, you know, depending on the division, stuff like that. But it's power bar all three with basically loose IPF rules. So head down on bench and things like that. It's kind of unified rules, but it's untested. Right. And it's knee sleeves or knee wraps. So that depending on what they want to do, like I think I'm signed up for the regional here in Illinois in February. It's power bar on all three with knee wraps, walked out combo rack. That's pretty cool. That feels very nostalgic for a person like me, you know, and it's like, or they might even have knee sleeves, but it's starting to come back into this like sense of like normalcy, and other feds are starting to adopt to it too. I know Powerlifting United is adopting a power bar on all three format. So it's up to the meet director. If a meet director wants to just say, hey, I want to run a power bar on all three, think about what that does for meet directors. They don't have to have this crazy barrier. They don't have to have 6 deadlift bars, 6 squat bars, 6 power bars. All they need is a couple of combo racks and three or 4 good power bars, and they can run a meet.
How does that impact the bigger guys that can't get under the bar?
Well, I mean, considering I have two shoulder reconstructions and a lat reattachment, I mean, it ain't comfortable. But I watched Zach Myers. He won Reach Rumble, which was the one that they had over in Utah. So Abs came over and they worked with Reach to do that, and he won it. And I mean, it was him getting under it wasn't pretty. You know, I had another lifter. He's like a 6'4" gargantuan man, and he's just out all the way to the edge, just pushing against the plates, you know. But, you know, if one of the biggest squatters in the world does it, you know, IPF lifter Jesus Oliveira's, big 400-pound dude, can get under a bar. I mean, you find a way.
Well, if we go back, Kazmaier got under it. I mean, before the bar existed, everybody was able to get under the bar.
Yeah.
Where I think maybe it was the Pasanella bar might have been the first one. And I think the reason why that was created was to deal with the bar whip. Mm-hmm. But if you look back, and unfortunately you got to do this through Powerlifting USA, right?
Right.
You know, it's not cataloged on the internet. Some are, some aren't. They were York plates, you know, so I wonder, and you might be able to ask this, if you have, you know, a good solid 45-pound power bar and they're kilo plates, you know, now you're taking and you're reducing the width that those plates are actually on that bar, which is going to reduce the amount of width that's going to be on there.
Right.
You know, so with the kilo plates in that power bar with weights, usually it's about 700-800 where you'll start to really notice the whipping on that. Is that as prevalent with the kilo plates or not?
It's very prevalent. And I'll be honest with you, it actually it exasperates it, because I've started to prep a little bit, and even though like I only got up to 650, but I had this epiphany, because right now, I believe Jesus right now is suffering from a back injury. But it's a very similar back injury to Ray Williams. And before him, it was Blaine Sumner. And they all same commonality. And if you watch how their squats are, they're all the same. And I felt it. So it was only 650. And I went down with it, came out of the hole, and I hit it really hard. And you can see it. And I could show you the video. And it literally about midway up, and you can see the bar just kind of kick down. And then as soon as I come up with it, I ride with it up, and it literally comes back up and it kicks back down. And which tells me at this point, like we're reaching the capacity of these power bars, because especially at 1,000+ pounds, these things are reaching their capacity, especially with like the kilo. You can put more on it, right? With these kilo plates, you can put way more on it. So you throw 1,000 pounds worth of reds on there, that thing, like when they're just walking, it's just this. Where do you think that energy's going? The energy is going straight down to the ground through their spine, going straight down to their SI joint, and then deviating through the legs. At some point, when you do that enough, like it's cool that it's simple, but it puts the bigger lifters on more borrowed time. And I think that's the one thing that we forgot. So again, it goes back to, we forget why we did these things originally.
Yeah, I mean, some seem to be out of necessity. Others were to get more weight. Like
right.
The Texas deadlift bar was not out of necessity.
No, it wasn't. It was purely
to get more weight.
It was to get more weight. Yeah. But like a squat bar was for necessity. There was people who couldn't get under a squat bar. And the thing is what we're used to is these big wide albatross setups. You know, that's the old multiply way. This thing they had to sit on top of your traps. You couldn't low bar a multiply squat. Like that's why like we weren't going to be in close. You needed to be able to keep it balanced, and you needed to be able to ride that. It's like, you know, it's like lining up. It's like, you know, walking a tightrope.
Yeah.
Right. And I try to tell people that, and they ask me like, well, what's it like doing this and stuff? I'm like, it's like walking a tightrope, because the thing is there's no grinding. If you get pushed forward, there's no grinding a multiply squat like that. You have to stay in the pocket with it. Right. Whereas in raw, where it's like, let your chest collapse. And this is fun. By the way, this is so fun teaching Heidi, because when like she's learning raw, but she's like used to high bar, she's like that, and I look at her, I'm like, don't be afraid to let your chest fall. It's okay. Just drop down, keep that bar center of mass, and just drive your chest back up again. She's like, this is so not what I'm used to. I'm like, it's not weight that's gonna kill you.
Yeah.
It's not like the 700-pound squat putting on a 132 frame.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like, do it like a good morning and she'll understand.
Exactly. But the thing is now you go back to old training philosophies.
Yeah.
Why it mattered, when you were training and back in the day in your prime, it's like heavy good mornings, suspended good mornings and stuff like that. It was like, well, why did they do that? It got lost in translation because they didn't have the gear that we had. Why did Ed train the way he did? And it's like, we want to be super, 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 super dogmatic about these training methodologies, but you have to understand and you ask the question, is it important to remember this stuff? And the answer to that question is yes, because we forget our whys and we forget our hows and I forget when they did this is why they did it, because there were a lot of people in gear. And it was trained out of necessity. And there's different things that were trained out of necessity to be able to reinforce that pattern that was the most optimal.
Yes. I think that's really important, because when you go to simplify kind of what you were saying, if it was a multiply gear, the whole aspect of the training of any of the special exercises or any accessories were to keep you in that position that keeps the bar in a straight path, right? Not so much to recover from the position if it breaks, because if it breaks, you're fucked, right? So the whole thing was to build that torso and that stability strength to not have it break. Right. Where in raw, it is going to break. So now the training has to be not as static in nature, but to actually be able to recover and grind through. Right. Right. So one's more grinding, the other one's more, kind of like staying in the tension of that pocket, and all those exercises kind of related to that. And if people would look really close and do, here's this training, what was that gear? Right. And then here's that training and here's how it was done with people in single ply. And you're going to see there's deviations in that, let's say conjugate, if we just throw that out. For sure. There'll be deviations in the way that people were using conjugate, even when it was at the popularity of its height, in single ply and in raw compared to what the multiply was. Those deviations were there for a reason. Yes. And if you dig back in and look through the old articles or interviews that people have about that, they will tell you the reasons why they were doing these things. Right. Right. So it's all there, which helps to allow the lifter or the coach to better understand how to reinforce the technique that you actually have, make sure it doesn't break down, and then how to recover if it does break down. Right. That's your accessories, that's your periodization. Right. And all those, they're all there. All the clues are there to be able to broaden your view, on how to work with many different people, because everybody's still a little different, which that's the one thing through the podcast, which, I've always known this, but when it's like straight in your face, and it's straight in your face because you're speaking to a lot of these people at competitions and stuff too. Right. You realize real quick, everybody trains at the highest level. Everybody trains different, right? Everybody. And the whole concept of, well, don't look at them because they're all outliers is kind of ridiculous to me, because how do you know you're not an outlier, for one thing? And the sport definitely now has more genetic freaks than it ever had before, because it's got a bigger pool. For sure. But most of the people aren't, for one thing. But if we still look at all of those, and let's just assume they're genetic outliers, and find the commonalities amongst all of them. All different training methods, but what are the commonalities? There's the belief that you talked about, the ability to auto-regulate, to make, training decisions right on a spot, or to have the fortitude or the thought process, like, this isn't going well, text my coach now, right, before this next set, just to kind of reinforce what they're thinking. All those are similar across everybody, all of them. Right. With maybe an exception of one just freak that just maxes out all the time and gets away with it, even at the highest levels, which still blows my fucking mind that there are people that do that. But it works, so you can't say anything about it. But so I think when we say things like, you should know your history, people are thinking that we're coming across in such a way that just to be able to respect the people that came before you, which is a part of it.
It is.
But it's not the biggest thing. The biggest thing is going to be able to help you to see that all those people train different. All the people now train different. So how are you going to be able to train different to maximize your own potential? Because you're not going to be the outlier that this is going to work exactly the same for you as it did for anybody else, when that's never been the case with anybody.
Right.
Ever.
Right.
Right. So it's to be able to broaden that view, or coaches that get pigeon-toed, into their bias so tightly that they can't see what's best for their own lifter that they're working with.
Right.
And I'll say that's good in only one regard, that it's not working for the lifter, then they know who to refer them to.
For sure.
Which rarely happens. But that's the only time I would say being strongly tight in your bias that may work for 60% or whatever it's going to be. But you better be really good at referring people out.
We have such an ego in this sport that we can do everything. And I see this a lot because I consult a lot, and I've done this, and how I kind of started through this, again, going back to, with all the equipment and how it's kind of turned, it changes methodologies. It changes, like, what did Kurt Kowalski do back in the day, right? Like, what did, everything kind of, like, how did everything come to be? I just learned that Ricky Dale Crane passed away just recently. I learned a lot just kind of hearing his rants and stuff like that, and some of the old stuff that he used to say. He was a character, not to mention just the stuff that he just, like, you thought he had like a flea market, and it was just, he's like, I got this. It's like, you want me to create you a deadlift bar? It's like, whatever. It's like, I saw one of those floating around and stuff. I'm pretty sure we have one at SBC. It's just like, it was just kind of handmade, and it's kind of the Wild West and stuff like that. But, like, you understand that past, and you understand, like, that it's our future now, because we're using power bars on 3 in the untested. Like, yeah, IPF's been doing this forever. The IPF's just doing what they do and what they've always done, and they're going to continue to. But for the rest of the sport that's not IPF, like, this is all uncharted territory, and we haven't seen this in 20 plus years. So people's training methodologies are changing. What they're considering good versus bad in terms of how they do things and their mobility and stuff like that. It's just like, what they're going to find is what's working, what we used to work for them is no longer going to work. And everybody's wanting to push to be a pro level power lifter, or be high level, or make the sport mainstream. We've been hearing that for years, right? But it was on ESPN back in the 90s.
It was on ABC.
Yeah.
And Wide World of Sports at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. So, people talk about, well, it's going to be rise. It had ascension. There was flames on the platforms and stuff. I remember John Enzer just walking out there, and everything's flamed up, and he was in his own red singlet and stuff. And now we call it the newbie singlet because it's the white things and stuff. But, like, it's crazy to think about that, because it comes full circle. But as we kind of move forward into that, people do become dogmatic, because even now, like, no one knows who RTS is. No one knows who Mike is, even though everyone uses his system. Everyone just creates RPE and stuff, and it's all based upon his fundamental system. Everyone wants to be dogmatic on conjugate, but they want to use bands and chains and dynamic effort and max effort method. But they don't know where that came from. They don't take the time to understand where that came from in the context in which it was used. And what's really crazy for me, it's like, I've never really had a coach ever. I mean, I had a coach kind of, sort of, like, I had my original coach. He kind of taught me the sport a little bit. I trained under Al Caslow, and, of course, he had people that, coached him and stuff like that, Rick Hussey, and he had great influences, but he taught me quite a bit. But I never really adopted their methods. It was all from reading books, and it was just combing through the Elite FTS logs. There was no Instagram back then, and, like, there was Instagram, but it wasn't what it was, and people weren't posting stuff to YouTube. And So my source of knowledge was going through, Chad Wesley Smith stuff, Croc stuff, Al stuff, you know, your posts, Harry Selko, like just listening, like going through that entire page, like every day, what was new, and reading on it and ingesting it. And then, building my crew, pulling Jeff Frank out of Gold's Gym, saying, "Hey, you're strong," because he's squatting 595 in a Gold's Gym on a busted power bar. I was like, "You ever competed before?" "No." Him and his roommate.
Yeah.
I'm like, "You come train with me," and I pulled him, and he came and he goes on to squat 877 raw and then squat 1200 multiply. Right. And so it's the history of things that you just sit here and you're like, you just do things that work. Like you find what works, and you don't be dogmatic about it. You just understand, like, these things were created. Fire, like, how many uses have we found for fire since it was created? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like, fire's fire, and you use it for a lot of different things. Just because you found a new way to use it doesn't mean that you invented fire. So I think that's part of it as well. I think just.
So through your timeline, where do these gyms fall? So you're in high school doing the high school thing. Then when you go into college, is that where you hooked up with Caslow?
No. I had kind of a weird part. So I was in high school, I did high school and stuff like that. And then I kind of did a gym. I went to Vessels, and it was kind of a small gym in my hometown. And then from there, I linked up with my ex-wife. So we left and went to a town called Warrensburg, Missouri. It's a very unnoteworthy town, other than it's about 10 miles from Whiteman Air Force Base, where all the B-2s are housed. So I just got to see B-2s every day. And I just kind of trained at a local gym there. And I was just kind of living life and stuff like that. Still powerlifting and still kind of doing stuff. But it wasn't until I moved to Kansas City, and I did my first meet in Kansas City. I believe it was USPA. USPA was still kind of getting prominence and stuff. And I'm pretty sure, like, Steve Dennison was like, it was still relatively new. So even Steve Dennison was like showing up to judge and help, which is the Fed president. And, so I linked up with Al at that meet because I was introduced to him. I didn't know who he was. Good buddy of mine from my hometown, old training partner, introduced me. And then the rest was kind of history off of that, and that was just, he needed help. Kind of like Al needed help, he was just, because he wasn't going to Nebraska a whole lot anymore, because after Rick died. And so he was training down here with like a crew we had out of a storage unit. It's just a two.
So what was that like? Because I remember seeing pictures of this thing. I'm like, how in the hell are you guys doing this?
I was a climate controlled storage facility. We got the okay from them. I mean, there was no bathroom. We peed in bottles.
Yeah.
And it's like, it was just like a handful of us, and we're just go in there, open it up, turn on a rickety old stereo. We had the mono in there. And
so then you had to go outside between sets because of all the shit that's in there, or there wasn't a whole lot in there?
It was pretty spacious. I mean, it was wall to wall of stuff.
Yeah.
We had everything in there. It was just like a 2-unit. So it was like basically like a 2-car garage. So it was pretty good size. But we trained out of there. It's just a lot of times there's just 1 or 2 people. So if you had to train, you better be training effectively and be training smart. Right. And so because, at the time, Al was extremely busy with work, and he traveled all the time, as you know. And so he would come in and he would do a squat and a bench session back to back, and he'd be so drained. Like, he'd be so drained from travel and stuff, and he'd just get buried under 804, and he'd come walking out of it just meaner than a hornet. But he's like 5'5". He like, what are you gonna do? But then he'd show up on meet day, and he'd squat 900. Right? It was just like, how do you do that?
Great ambassador for the sport, though, because I mean, he had a professional job. He gave a shit about his family. He gave it. He balanced things very well.
Yes.
And it wasn't just the perception of balance. He was actually balancing things pretty well, but running his ass into the ground.
Yes.
To be able to do it.
he was a huge inspiration of mine. And I've kind of drawn commonalities. Some of the best champions in this sport really do. It doesn't always seem like they have it figured out, but like if you look at Christy Hawkins, she owns her own business. I think it's like a biomedical company or something to that effect. I don't know. She's a genius. She is brilliant. Like if you take in a second just to kind of what she does, she speaks at seminars. She'll go to like for she goes, you know, she literally has her own business and stuff like that. And yet she's the strongest coefficient lifter in the world and the strongest female in the world. And she's just the nicest person, but she's brilliant. And Al was the same way. You know, he was brilliant in his mind, super gifted as an athlete, but he just kind of knew how to turn on intensity. You know, when it came to work, and it came to work, and he did stuff and he trained like people probably, you know, I say, I talk to some of the old dogs who might know who he is and stuff. They're like, what did he do toward the end? Is like, he trained 1 day a week, maybe a day and a half at most. I'd go in, spot him at 4:00 in the morning before he had to be on a plane at 6, right? Or 7. And he'd get off a plane because he had to be back at his house to tuck his kids in. He'd get off a plane. I'd meet him at the gym. He'd get a quick session in, throw his gear back in the trunk of his car, go home and take care of his family. And that's how it was for a couple of years toward the end there. Right. And that's just what it was. And, you know, I think a lot of people do that. I mean, and it's kind of a weird way. I've kind of found myself in that same situation. I don't train a whole lot. My last meet that I did, I trained 2 days a week, did the best I've ever done. It's not always about like the time you put into the gym. There comes a point in time, and I think everyone knows it. And I think Mike Tushir talks about it quite a bit. There's a point in time when our maturity levels, when we hit our peak and stuff like that, the accessories become a little bit less important. The time in the gym, the accessories may become a little bit more important, but that time under the bar to squat may not be as important. Working up to doing a bunch of back down sets and stuff like that, you know how to squat. You just need to get comfortable with something heavy, right? So my own personal training has changed greatly. I don't do down sets. I work up to my top single, and then I let my accessories give me my stimulus. I don't go do 4 sets of 4 on squatting and do some down sets or whatever to reinforce my technique. I just get to the point where I need to do that. I feel objective about what I did. And then I'll go do my accessories. You know, I'll do my hack squat or whatever. I'll do whatever to kind of reinforce, you know, give myself good tension, you know, on my tendons and build muscular endurance and things like that make me a good athlete. Right. So, and I think toward the end with a lot of these lifters that are, especially at the top end, right? You get a lot of these guys that are pushing, and they're pushing their limits and stuff. It's like, understand the progression you're at. And what you said earlier, like literally at the beginning, is like the different phases of a lifter's life. It's the ones that really kind of enter their demise or they get hurt is they keep training like a newbie lifter. They're no longer training. They're not training like a professional. They're not training in that later stage.
Yeah.
They're not training for maintenance. They're not training for preservation. They're not training for longevity. They're training to continue to push the limit. So I got to do more hypertrophy. I got to do more of this. I got to do more. Cool. It's great. It's a very, very, very American concept. But if you look at like a lot of old training methods and stuff, like it was very objective. You do your primary movement and you keep that objective on what you accomplish that day. If it's meant to kind of just feel a good amount of weight and be acclimated and work that, like that's what you need to do. And then you cut shop and you go focus on the things you need to do for becoming a good athlete as a whole, not just forcing that issue over and over and over and over and over.
What's interesting because it's the opposite of what got you there, you know, which is I've spoken about a lot of times because you do more, you get more results because you can recover better when you're younger, but as you get older, it's more optimal. But we see the same thing in all other aspects of life. So when you're, you know, starting your career as a software engineer, right? And so in your 20s, when you're like busting your ass on this and then studying other areas of that outside of what you're actually studying. You know, you're building your resume, you're building your knowledge and so forth. And for like a decade, you learned, here's the most important things, right? So now you don't have to do that as much. It's like, here's the most important things that I need to focus on to be able to get the best quality work out that I can.
Right.
And then here's time to explore some other things,
Right.
you know, because it's always changing. So that time set aside, but instead of that being like 80% of the time, like it was when you were younger, it's now like 20% of the time to be able to do that. If you're courting or you're in a relationship with somebody, you're like all over each other, hard. Then if you've been with somebody for 10 years, it's like, here's the most important things that we need to take care of to make sure this relationship sustains over this long period of time. And I'm sure if I sit here and talk, there's more and more examples that are going to show this same path. So why would it not be the same with training when it's the same in every other area of life? Where I think a couple things that happened there is people think they can skip that first phase. Like if they want to be a software engineer, they want to start where you're at now and not have the 10 years of all that other stuff. And you can't hack that. You know, in powerlifting, you're still going to need all these reps of the technical efficiency that happen within hopefully that time frame where you can actually recover from all that, make all the stupid mistakes and all that, and build it. You can't hack that either, you know, and jump over all that. And their hacks would be mentors, coaches, stuff like that. But they've in one way or another always existed. You know, Al giving you advice or all these other people giving you advice. Some you take, some you don't, you know, whereas, you know, now the hacking's probably a little bit better because most of the coaches that I know, granted, I'm not like pulling in Instagram people that just competed in one meet that are coaching, you know, have a very broad view of training principles to know how to communicate and apply that to whoever they're working with, you know, so that would be a hack there, the same way you would have hacks in the workplace. If you were to mentor somebody coming through in the profession you're in, it's like, okay, don't do this shit.
Right.
And all this. And, so it's interesting to me that it's so hard for some lifters when they get to that point, even though there's been multiple people that have publicly stated, you know, Blaine Sunner saying at one point, I think he could only squat once a month or once every 2 weeks. Dave Hoff once a month. I think Donnie Thompson was saying once a month. You know, all these big squatters, especially, it's different because it's way more weight on their spine too. But they realize they don't have to squat twice a week, every week. You know, they can only recover from, and hopefully by that time, their technique is pretty fucking reinforced.
Right.
You know, so they don't have to build the skill of the technique.
I just had one of my clients, I actually co-parent him, co-parenting with Dan Bell. His name's David Raymond. He's a little 165er. At Power Surge, he went for a 750 squat, which was the all-time world record, right? And he missed it on depth, but we basically run him like an old Lily Bridge method type of program. He doesn't squat every week. He squats every other week. In deadlifts, he deadlifts one week. He deadlifts 1 week. He squats the other week, and then he tapers away. He benches. His bench variation changes a little bit, and and I just use that peaking method because he's always done it. He's one of the top 148ers in the world and one of the top 165ers in the world. Why would I mess with that success? It's not above me as a coach to sit here and be like, you know what, that works. My job is to get you to your goals, and those goals are my goals, which is like a lot of my own philosophy is like when I take on a client, their goals are mine and I'm the steward of those goals. And it's funny because I used to get like made fun of by like Danny LaMartina when she was in Kansas City with Dave at the time. And, cause like my philosophy is like, I'm not a person who kind of sits above people. I'm more like you have a person climbing Everest, right? You have the climber and then you have the Sherpas. The Sherpas are just the guides. They carry the packs, they carry the load for stuff but the climber, like that's their experience. That's their journey. That's their own personal journey because they're battling something. They're going up that mountain. Like there's a reason why they're putting themselves at that level of risk. Right. And I would challenge that with anyone. But those Sherpas have been up and down that mountain more times they can count. They're not doing anything special. They're not touching the summit. It's against their belief. But like at the end of the day, it's like, it's for that person. And that's kind of where I've always just kind of kept my own training philosophy in that space. It's like, I'll accompany people on their journeys, but I will not like claim their summits, but they will be my own. Right. And I think when you think of it that way, you have these people in the different training methodologies you have, like, you have no ego. You have no ego in any of it. And people, because the people want instant gratification these days. They do. Like, there's no, like, I sit in this space where there is no silver bullet. And I have to implore that on, like, I have to like imply that onto a lot of lifters, because we live in a world today of instant gratification. Everything is at our fingertips. The next training tip, the next, want to put 100 pounds on your deadlift? Try this variation. And I'm like, sorry, kids, 8-minute abs was a lie.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so for me, I kind of put myself in this space of just, again, I try to be a voice of reason for every person. I'm like, they're like, well, I want to be able to squat this, or I want to be able to bench this. I'm like, okay, this is what we have to do. And know that it's going to take time. Time is the ingredient on all of this. And I need you to be consistent. And the more consistent you are, the faster that may be. It may not be. It just depends. Right. And I think at the end of the day, when you're in a world where it's, especially me, it's like, I had to be really patient. Nothing in this sport, like my numbers in itself, nothing came easy for me. I've fallen apart a lot. My durability is not great, but I continue like to kind of push forward in this space. But again, people train irresponsibly and they push, I think when, Zach was on Table Talk with you, he tore his pec 2 weeks out of the American Pro. He was pacing toward like a 650 bench. He was pacing toward like one of the biggest pound for pound totals all time for a man. He was looking great. Boom, gone. And he'll tell you, he's like, I just busted up some scar tissue. And I look at him, he's got a whole ass blood pool down his entire body. Like this pectoral, it was down on his leg. And I'm like, buddy, that ain't no, that ain't no scar tissue. So, but and we played it patient, and we built him back up. And he at reach rumble, he benched like 630, so, or 624. And so like time, like you get those people that don't really embrace the instant gratification. Those are typically the people that are going to be the best at what they do, because they have to realize they have to sit in the background. They have to be unknown for a little bit. They got to take second place. Like, they don't go around and gloat that they're going to be the best and stuff like that. They're not going to be a person who's like, I want to, I talked to this one kid once and he was like, I want a 1,700 pound total. I was like, what's your current total? He's like 1,400. I'm like, what's wrong with 15? What's wrong with 16? Have you done those yet? No, but that ain't shit.
Something that
weird.
Yeah. I go back and forth on this one a little bit, because if I'm to go back when I was that age, I wanted 100 pounds on my bench in the next month. I mean, we all kind of did. But then there's that other part that's like the reality part. And I wonder that, because our only real source of information would be Powerlifting USA, right? Then in every issue, they had the classification system, which was the old USPF classification system, with class 5, class 4, class 2. And I remember when I first started competing, there were class 2 and below meets. There were meets I couldn't enter, because I didn't have a class 1 total. Yeah. And then the masters was a weird one, right? Because class 5, class 4, class 3, class 2, class 1, masters and elite. And it's like, well, masters, that was just a weird name when there's a division for masters. But I think for me, there were two catalysts to kind of help with that delayed gratification. Was, the top 100 for sure. That was, in there once a year. It's like, here, I'm not even on it. Like here, I'm 70th. I want to be in the top 50 or whatever it's going to be. But then that classification system helped, because here's my first meet. Here's where I am. Let's just get to the next one, right? The overall goal is let's get to the nationals, which you need an elite total to qualify for. Right. But I could physically see, here I'm class 4. Here I'm class 3. I'm not going to go from that, to the elite total. And so I don't know if that conditioning propaganda back then, powerlifting propaganda, right?
Right.
You know, I don't
Right.
know if that kind of like helped or if other people saw it the same way, but that kind of set, you know, that path where here's where it is. And then of course, over the years, everybody's got their own classification system and all this other, but I think that's why Louis always only embraced that
Yeah.
ever is being the elite. The only thing where it got weird is when the gear started to give more carryover. The elite's really not an elite. You know, it probably should be 200 pounds higher
Right.
than what it was. But it did create that objective of, you know, look, if you're going to stay here, you need to get an elite total within 2 years or whatever it was going to be. And if you're not able to do that in his Bulgarian system type of way, right, then you probably shouldn't be here.
Right.
Right. And that would be one of those things of this system isn't going to work for you, you know, get out. And working that way where I now, you know, people are seeing top lifters all the time,
Mhm.
which we saw pictures, you know, but even looking back, were you the same way? I mean, when you're looking through Powerlifting USA and you're younger and you're seeing the top meet results, you're not, I wasn't sitting there thinking I can be there. And I'm saying like, holy fuck, that's a long way to go.
Mm-hmm.
I most definitely wasn't thinking I'll be there next year, you know, so I don't know, you know, how the mindset of this whole thing changed so much because we can say social media and all this other stuff. But if you're a 400-pound squatter and you're watching and you weigh the same as John Hack, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're watching him, I don't understand how somebody can think, well, I'm going to be there next year. I just need to take a ton of trend. It's like, it's so odd.
I have a theory on this, and it may not always be well received, but we are a couple generations into mommy and daddy telling us we can be whatever we want to be. So we're entitled to that, right? So these younger generations, you know, I was told to get a job. I had my first job when I was 14, right? I was washing dishes and stuff like that. Like, you can do whatever I want, but I need to get you know, you do the things, you know, grow up, get a job, you know, get your high school diploma. You know, my mom was a working person. She worked 3 jobs to kind of keep me and my brothers going and stuff like that. And, but that verbiage was get a job, grow up, be a productive member of society. Nothing's going to be given to you. You can be whatever you want to be, but you got to do these things first. Right. There's, you know, you'll go far, but subsequently, well, you can be whatever you want if you set your mind to it.
Summer's here and so is the heat. I've spent most of my life training in unconditioned gyms, and I know most of you that are training in garage gyms, private gyms, black iron gyms, know what I'm talking about when I say the heat sucks. It kills your motivation to go to the gym, it kills your performance, but it doesn't have to if you keep your electrolytes up. That's why today's episode is sponsored by Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink with everything you need and nothing you don't. This means lots of salt with none of the junk. No sugar, no colors, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. It contains an electrolyte ratio of 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Element can help prevent and eliminate headaches, muscle cramps, fatigue, brain fog, sleeplessness, and other common symptoms associated with electrolyte deficiency. Right now, Element is offering Table Talk listeners a free sample pack with any drink mix purchase. That's 8 single serving packets for free. And if you're an Element Insider, you have first access to Element Sparkling, a bold 16-ounce can of sparkling electrolyte water. Get yours at drinkelement.com. This deal is only available through the Table Talk link.
You can do this. You can do it. And it became on TV and it became things like that. Now you have this whole generation believing that, growing up, realizing they can't be everything they want to be. And then you have the next generation come along saying the same thing, being entitled to it. And it's like, you know, you have a couple generations of young adults saying, just waiting to become whatever I want to be. You know, I'm just waiting for that 400-pound bench. I'm just waiting for that 700-pound squat. Meanwhile, you know, those genetic outliers, they're just working. They're not working any harder or any less harder than the average person. Yeah, they may be a little more obsessive and stuff like that. And there's a degree of obsession and stuff, you know. It's like, for me, like, I just think about this stuff. I was just on stuff and I just thought about it all the time. I nerded out about it. We're all nerds about something, right? I worked for a company called The Nerdery, and it was literally, yeah, I spent 8 years. It was called The Nerdery. And their core values is that everybody on this planet is a nerd about something.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. And what is a nerd? A nerd is a person who is just hyper fixated on something. You can be a nerd about makeup. You can be a nerd about Legos. You can be a nerd about tracksuits. You can be a nerd about weightlifting. I mean, what is a bunch of bodybuilders? There's just a bunch of nerds about muscular development.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if they had glasses and put on a pair of slacks and a shirt, they'd be like, nerd.
Yep, same thing.
Right,
yeah.
Same thing. So, right, it's like it's just passion. It's just pure passion incarnate. We just happen to turn it into a derogatory term or something to that effect, right? But at the end of the day, you know, especially now more than ever, like everyone's watching anime and whatever and doing weird sumo setups, thinking that there's some cartoon character. It's kind of funny, but it's at the end of the day, we all have a passion about something. And these people, like these outliers, like they're just growing at a different rate, right? They're still working hard, but they're still looking for that instant gratification, but they're getting it. And they're like, oh yeah, cool. But the problem is the people look at that because the information is so at our hands. They're like, well, this person's putting 100 pounds on their deadlift in 12 weeks. Like, why can't I? You ain't built the same. And that's okay. Just means you got to keep working a little bit longer. Do the same things, but what takes them 6 months may take you a year. And that's okay, but we're not ready for that conversation in a lot of ways. And a lot of the ways, it's like, you know, I have a little 17-year-old guy, and I started working with him, and he was 13. It's kind of funny. And he started out with like a 500-pound total. He's going to get a college scholarship. He's going to have like a 1,500-pound total by the time he's 18. He just took 545 for a squat and just bent 545 for a squat. He's going to bench over 315 at 17. And he's going to pull close to 6. You know, he's going to get a college scholarship for powerlifting. That wasn't heard of when I was his age. We're playing for different stakes.
Oh, there's definitely, like I said, with a bigger talent pool.
Yeah.
When I look at the generational things, I look at it a little bit differently, because if we go back when, you know, Gen X were making fun of the lazy millennials, right? So the way I kind of look at that was, okay, well, who's their parents? Who's their mentors? You know, and who are they looking up to? You. Right. So you're bitching about the generation that's underneath you, which you had you created them. You were their heroes. You were their mentors. You were their parents. Right. So when we're bitching about Gen Z, it's like, well, who's the mentors? Who's their heroes? And who's their parents? Right. So a lot of the time the blame is misplaced.
Yeah.
Because it's on the people that they're aspiring to be like. So people coming into the sport now, you know, they're going to be watching the people at the height of their game, which are usually one generation above them.
For sure.
You know, and that's their heroes. That's who they're looking to for mentorship, you know, and the parents and so forth. So the blame it's always kind of misblamed a little bit, to where at some point throughout all this, one of these generations is going to realize that fuck these people that are telling me what to do. It's like a rebellious generation.
Yeah.
Right. I guess the boomers were that way with the Vietnam War and all the other kind of stuff, right? But they kind of lost that as they got older,
right?
And so it may come up, you know, with the Gen Z, like, you know, fuck all you guys, you've been lying to us this whole time. We actually have to work hard. You know, we have to do this. And I do see that in some of the younger ones now,
Yep.
you know, where they, as long as they're picking those heroes, mentors, and people to be able to that have that ethic, to be able to ingrain that in that, then not only will they be stronger, but think about the ones that are going to come up underneath them.
Right.
You know, so from a powerlifting perspective, as this pipe keeps moving, you know, up and up and up, you know, you get that one, you know, that has that strong ethic, that understands delayed gratification, that this is a long-term process, that when I come into the sport, I should look at this as a quadrennial, you know, and all that becomes like common, then they become the mentors, leaders, and coaches. Imagine what the fuck the people coming up under them are going to be.
Right.
Right. Because we've already seen the increase in strength across the board just because the training knowledge is way, maybe it's not better, it's distilled much better.
Right.
Right. So all the mistakes all these other generations have made, people like yourself, you're not teaching them those things. You're helping them to avoid the really stupid shit, which take that with an increased talent pool. Look at what we have. We got people doing some crazy shit. Right.
Yes.
And the sport will just keep progressing because of that.
So I wholeheartedly agree, and you're seeing it, and it's awesome because this is like makes it come so full circle. Because when you think about, you know, how untested powerlifting is kind of coming back around and coming full circle with, you know, reduction of bars, power bar on all three, people wanting things, and you have this hustle culture that's being created, right? You know, I used to go to these Globo gyms and stuff like that. You see these kids, these 17-year-old kids are all in the gym. They're all trying to be Chris Bumstead.
Mhm.
You know, I'm like, you bet you got like 17 boxes of hamburger helper a day before you get there, bud. Right? But at the same time, they're just working so hard. You know, and there's a degree of vanity to it because they're all just on their phones on Instagram and stuff like that. Cool, I'll give you that. Whatever. But at the end of the day, it's like we had mirrors. We're just flexing it, throwing flexes in mirrors and stuff. We wanted to look strong. We wanted to look like, we wanted to look awesome. We wanted to look like Macho Man Randy Savage.
Yeah, and if we had Instagram, more than likely we'd be doing the same shit.
Absolutely, right? So it comes full circle because the reason why I say that is the natty lifters are stronger than the untested. The talent pool's getting bigger, and we're getting those D1 athletes funnel in, but they're working hard. They're putting up numbers that like the biggest female squat of all time right now, raw, is an untested IPF lifter. She squats 685 in a pair of SBD knee sleeves and a Jordans, right?
Crazy.
The biggest raw total of all time is an IPF lifter, 2549, right? This era, our era, and I'm included, you know, we're the cautionary tales. Don't be us. We saw instant gratification. The moment my stuff started to fail, that's when I jumped untested, right? My bench plateaued off. I can't just weather this plateau. Time to add some super soldier serum.
Yeah.
Right? Guess what? Boom. Bye-bye adductor. Boom. Bye-bye PCL. Boom. Bye-bye bicep longhead. You know, all because for the sake of instant gratification. I want to be stronger. I want to be stronger faster. I shouldn't be plateauing off. Right? It's, you know, I fell into that trap. Right? And all I need to do is just weather one more plateau, continue to eat, continue to sleep, and stuff like that. And I probably would have been just fine. Yeah, I wouldn't have got to the numbers, you know, and I probably wouldn't have been hurt as much.
Well, had you waited, let's say you overcome that one other plateau, right, and then that kicks the can for 3 years down the line or whatever it's going to be, then I don't want to say your peak because you're still competing now, but there's the optimal peak period.
Right.
Right. So in your 20s to 30s, that would have been extended 3 more years. Right. Who knows what could have happened in those 3, because injuries, overuse, strippers crack, you know, all these other things can knock people out of the sport.
Absolutely.
You know, a lot of things pull people out of the sport, but you know, had I waited longer, I would have, the way I kind of see it, I would have added 3 more years on before I was too fucked up to be able to do it at any optimal level. Now, where I was at that time when I had to leave at that optimal level, like that's a big fucking difference. And I'm like, was it really worth,
Yeah.
jumping on that much sooner, because maybe there's a 10 or 15 year period, that you could kind of stay hard, in this. People take gaps. I mean, people break, right? So,
For sure.
so it doesn't need to be 15 consecutive, right? So I need to be kind of clear on that.
Yeah.
Because a 10 to 15 seems to be the time period where people are going to, be around, if we're looking at a bell curve, 90%, to their 100% total potential of what they can do.
For sure.
With drugs or without drugs, right around there.
Right.
But we have seen some people about midway through that, life happens, something happens, and there's a 3-year break. Then they come back. It still ends up being that same time period, as long as whatever they're doing during that 3-year break isn't creating accumulated damage. In other words, they're not training like a fucking idiot. They're not doing the same stuff.
Yeah.
And normally that's not the case. Usually they're really not training it at all.
No.
And kind of pushing that way. But I do think with the topic of PEDs, that's an important one, because I've come to the conclusion that it's a net positive that we have more education about it, but it's not a net positive by a lot. I'm going to give it like a net positive 2,
Yes.
because there's a lot of negative. There's always that yin yang that kind of plays into that. So I do believe it's a net positive, right? Because we don't see things that you might have saw or that I saw, the way people were just randomly taking shit. Nobody knew what the fuck they were doing. It's just
500's the base, right?
Whatever, just fucking blast away, and that's probably not the right thing, so, or labs and stuff like that. A lot of other things that could have been done weren't really being done. Glorifying side effects, like, man, you're purple, you're going to do fucking great. All these, you're bloated, perfect, actually you need to be more bloated.
Right.
All this other kind of stuff, which we know is all kind of like bullshit now. So that creates that net positive, because any long-term health implications will be reduced.
For sure.
And a lot of side effects are being mitigated, but I'm not going to sit here and say that it's a net positive 50. It's barely a net positive.
Our heroes in powerlifting today are natty. Not, they're testable. Let me.
No, I'll agree. Now, people are not going to like what you said. A lot of people won't like what you said, but I agree with you 100%.
Right.
Right. Because they have more exposure. They have more eyes on them, but powerlifting can be very cultish, around federations, and they don't understand how big the untested side really is.
Yes.
Which blows I'm going to rant. It blows my fucking mind, right?
Right.
Because you can go to open powerlifting and fucking make 2 clicks and see how many people are competing, tested, untested.
Yes.
In, multiply, unlimited, raw. You can fucking physically see. And if you're a really nerd, you can download the database.
Yes, you can.
Right. And if you don't know Excel, you can use fucking GPT data analyst tool.
Yes.
And just start asking all kinds of shit, which I've done, right? So it's like 2 days of just geeking out, trying to figure shit out, nerding shit out on all this. But it blows my mind, because it's right there. It's like, come on, man, it's right there. The history's there too. You click, like when I had David Ricks out, holy fuck, is that guy? He competed a long ass time. Yeah. Right. And then Henry Thompson's like done like a zillion meets. Very few people. You got to like, scroll.
Look at Blake LaHue. Blake LaHue is a product of the Texas powerlifting system. You look at that kid's, he's a young guy, but look at his resume. He's got like 100 meets, and he's like 30 something.
See, that would be good. Now that you said that, that would be good advice for the people who are coming up that are aspiring to be like a lifter, that are younger lifters. Go find that lifter, look them up, and look at their history. Right. Right. And a lot like Blake or some of these other people, you'll find out that you might be stronger than what they were. Yeah. At that age.
Yeah. And he was IPF lifter. He did the drug tested scene, and then crossed over to untested. Did Showdown, different American pros, stuff like that. But I think the biggest thing today is like our heroes were, the heroes today are a lot of IPF lifters doing Sheffield and doing all these big things. And what's great about it is that there was a period of time, especially on the ascension of female powerlifting, that the heroes of female powerlifting were all untested.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So
100%.
what did the girls do? They went untested, right? And we all know what happens there.
Mm-hmm.
That's permanent.
Mm-hmm.
Like for guys, it's just a little bit, it's more of what we got. We might get some saggy boobies, whatever. But for women, that's permanent. That's sides that don't stop. Those are gifts that don't stop giving,
Mm-hmm.
right? The best thing I think that happened with female powerlifting was that the tested side became incredibly strong. So now I have ammo for all my female clients who are coming, or new clients. It's like, hey, could you think I could squat 600 pounds? I'm like, she can. Take a swing at it. Well, do I need to jump on whatever? I'm like, no. There may come a day where you have that, we have that talk, but I'm not going to facilitate that, nor have I ever.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just simply not my place. I tell all my clients that is a personal decision within yourself. And if you feel like, I'll be a voice of reason and I'll tell you what I know, but I am not going to be like, yeah, you should do this if you want to get good. It's their journey. And I don't want them coming back 5-10 years from now, looking at themselves in the mirror. It's like, well, what did I trade for this? And if the question is everything, then I failed them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I do think the best thing that's happened to powerlifting and segments of powerlifting is that the current drug tested culture and the heroes of drug testing, all these ladies pulling 500 plus pounds, almost 600 pounds, going to Sheffield. You have Agatha Shitko, 1,300 pound total, 148 pounds roughly. 150, whatever the IPF weight class is, she's pulling 545. She's nugget size. She benches in the 3s, squatting in the 5s and a pair of SBD knee sleeves. What the shit?
Mm-hmm.
What do you? And the thing is, it's that is possible. That's possible. And yeah, she's a genetic outlier, but there's possibility to that. There's not oh, I have to do all of these things. Now, for the untested side of things, we've just kind of been abandoned. We've been abandoned by feds. We've been abandoned by good, shitty coaches. We've been abandoned by gyms. And we're just kind of all over. There's this disarray everywhere. We're abandoned by our own selves.
Yes.
Right? We don't take responsibility for our actions. We become shitty people. We get divorces, make questionable decisions because we're in the middle of meat prep and we're sauced to the gills, and we're making decisions out of pocket that are in our head that we wouldn't otherwise do. Right? And we're not taking responsibility for that. So on our side, having a sense of stability, it's a little foreign to us. And the thing is that we haven't felt it in a really long time. And I think that's why you see a lot of multiply people really gravitate. They still hold on to the WPO because that was a time where it felt right.
Mm-hmm.
That was a golden period of peace and strength and prosperity in multiply. And everyone looks back at that and it's just that was it.
Well, on the opposite side of that, though, you could say the same thing was happening with single ply.
Right.
Because to say raw wasn't a thing, right? So,
right.
Outside of online, there was mutual respect between both.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's still true now. I mean, you can stick any group of lifters in a gym, tested, untested, any federation. And if there's 40 people trained in here and they're all from, there's mutual respect.
For sure.
Online, it's a different thing, but it's always been that way even before that. Whereas it seems like with the tested, they've been able to maintain their culture. It's changed and shifted and stuff like that, but a base of that culture was able to be maintained, throughout that time, to where on the untested or multiplied single, just geared like, see, geared is like untested. It's a fucked up thing.
Equipped, yeah.
Like equipped, right?
Yep.
Equipped. And the non-tested, there's like no I don't want to say it's a federation type of thing, but there's no unifying core values amongst everybody that kind of keeps all that intact, and I don't know what dissolved or what didn't dissolve, or if it was probably always there, but the population was so small that you really didn't know. Where from the outsider looking in, it seems like most of the drama that I see is falling in the multiply side, which is so odd to me because there's 2,000 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So how in the fuck can 2,000 have, all this infighting and all this bullshit, and 12 feds, to serve 2,000 people, where, and I don't know if it was always that way. There were rivals, say West Side, Big Iron and stuff like that. But come meet time, yeah, you're competing, but then you're asking, like, what are you guys doing? Like, everybody's trying to learn from each other,
Right.
To be able to go from there. But what I tell all lifters in regards to any of this stuff here is all of this is outside of your control.
Right.
Right. So it's sometimes you don't want to look behind the curtain. It's like the Wizard of Oz. You see behind the curtain, you're like, oh shit, this isn't actually, what I thought it was going to be. Like, you're a competitor, just compete, stay out of all the bullshit, and find the meets that are going to have the best people to compete against to be able to, bring you up. Which that's the one thing with the untested raw that I admire as the outsider looking in, is they seem to seek out the ability to be able to compete against each other the best. I'm sure there's going to be outliers that will avoid competing with somebody, but as a whole, that seems to be kind of what it is. Where if I go back in history where, there's like the battle between the APF and the IPA, that became this thing of people not wanting to compete against other people, which contradicts, what I'm seeing today, which is a great thing because it makes all of them stronger.
Right. I have such interesting opinions on this because, I'm going to toot my horn on that because on one hand, you have the John Hack appearance fee, right? Which is first place because John just shows up and takes first place.
Mm-hmm.
So now you have this entire generation of male untested powerlifters just disengaged from competition because they know that they're only playing for second. It's the Ed Cohn effect, right? You have a person who's just so far away from everyone else that you might as well just take your prize money and like add 1/3 to it and just create a second first place and just call it the John Hack appearance fee and then have a second first place for everyone else. Right. So there you have that disengagement. So you have some people like, well, I'm not going to win the meet, so I'm going to do a smaller meet or whatever. Right. But then you really do see the competition sought out on the female side because I call untested powerlifting, raw untested powerlifting right now, just white whale hunting. Because typically, like, if you think of like the sport of skateboarding, right? The sport of skateboarding has like really two major facets. You have the street skating side of things, and then you have the biggest trick competition. This is all like extra, like motocross, mountain biking, whatever, right? You have the biggest trick competition, which is usually like a half pipe or something like that. And they do some of this where like Tony Hawk is and stuff like that. But then you have the street skating, which those guys are not really as well known, but they're competing against each other in their proficiency to be just a good all-around skateboarder. They're not just vaulting themselves off of a giant half pipe doing like the craziest trick that they can to hope that they win, right? So untested powerlifting right now in a weird way is just that biggest trick competition. They're all chasing all-time world records, right? And it's just like, who's breaking the next all-time world record? When's the next biggest deadlift coming from Samantha Rice or Brianna Terry, right? What's the next biggest squat, biggest bench or whatever, right? So you had that competition. So the competition is who's breaking the records and who's just pushing that limit. Where it's like on the tested side, it's true competition. It's who's the best lifter of that day. You don't have them going for personal records or PRs or something to that effect. They're gaming the system. They're actually gaming the rules. They're winning the meet to get IPF world champion. You know, they're getting that invite to Sheffield. Sheffield was created out of spectacle to allow, because the biggest question is what are these people capable of, right? And Sheffield was made to do just that. Sheffield was made in their meet format was made to take these best lifters in the IPF and make them max out and incentivize maxing out, right? Throw money at them, make a meet format that rewards maxing out, right? Because it's a percentage system against the world record. Whereas an untested powerlifting, we're not in that competition space where we're jockeying on the third deadlift and switching attempts and all this other stuff to be able to pull out the win, to pull out best lifter, right? Our form of competition is, well, Samantha breaks the world record at 6:45, and then Brianni comes right behind and pulls 6:46, right? So it's that competition.
Well, you'll kind of create what's incentivized, though, right?
Right.
And so if the reward or if the carrot is going to be based upon a formula,
right,
then that's what you're going to end up with. If the reward is going to be based upon the status that comes with winning this weight class, going back, say, APF Senior Nationals or WPC Worlds or, IPF Worlds or stuff like that, then that's what the incentive is. And there's enough raw lifters now. I understand that if you don't have enough people to stack a class.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, you go to a meet and there's 15 people in the 220 class, then winning that meet, if it's a national meet, it's going to have some status.
For sure.
Now, if you go there and there's like 2 in that class and 3 in the 242s, then you kind of lose that whole thing. Where with the growth of the sport, and lifters are lasting longer than what was predicted. I can go back and we can remember, these raw lifters are not going to last more than 3 years because they're all going to get fucked up and hurt.
Yeah.
That's been definitively proven false.
Mm-hmm.
And where there's enough now that I think if there's a strong enough meet, that can create the credibility and last, the problem with these bigger meets is they have short lifespans.
For sure.
Then that could be recreated to where it's like, look, I am the X, 148 champion, whatever. And that's what the IPF has, right? So that's what they're incentivizing.
Yes.
Right. On the other side, it's monetarily being incentivized. But I've always kind of concluded, even with the WPO, this is not incentivized correctly.
No.
Right. Because a Dave Hoff's going to walk away. A John Hack's going to walk away all the time. And then anybody else is, not making shit. But if you took that same amount of money and gave, 1,000 to first class, or first place in each weight class, 750 to second, 500 to third. It's not a lot, but that 1,000 may pay for somebody, at least most of somebody's cost to get there. The 750 might pay for the hotel, that they were there, and the 500 pay for the entry fee and like food, whatever it's going to be. But overall though, what you're incentivizing is now winning, this class matters,
Yeah.
I won the 165, to where I can't even tell you, who's the best in what weight class for a lot of the raw stuff, because that's not how they're incentivized. I can tell you who was in the top 3, of Ghost Clash or whatever it's going to be.
Right.
I can tell you that. I can't tell you shit on the other stuff, which is odd because what is incentivized for the lifters are the world records for that class.
Right.
Right. So the lifters will, follow where the incentive is.
Right.
And I don't know if it's a numbers thing. I don't know, where it all falls. If just there's so much federation bullshit that not one federation has really planted the stake to be able to say this is the national title that really matters for untested, versus tested.
Right.
But I think that's what the real difference there is.
It really is, because, big dogs, if you remember big dogs, right? Like, you had to have a 2,300 plus pound total just to be there. They took the 15 biggest dudes in the world, right? Like, you had everyone from, you had Andrei Milanichev, you had, Jezo Uepa and stuff like that. There's a bunch of people. I know JP wanted to do it at one point. That was one of his aspirations. You had Wayne Howlett, you know,
Lily Bridge,
the Lily Bridges and stuff like that. You know, Yuri Belkin even showed up and threw a 2,300 pound total. I mean, he was a tiny little dude. You know, they just did it. And then they had a prize pool. And you know what? It was a spectacle, and it was total wins all. You know, so I don't give a crap about that. And like, there's prestige to that. Total wins all. Reach Rumble was supposed to be that. So the guy that owns Reach, you know, he's like, I want 13, 15 of the biggest totals in the world. You know, we had a lot of people fall off, like Phil Herndon fell off, hurt his bicep and stuff. You know, Danny Grigsby, all these people, they all kind of got hurt and they kind of fell off and stuff like that. So like, it was kind of not as big as it is, in my opinion, as it should have been. But it was, they made it equal. They did something that I don't think untested powerlifting's ever seen. Is they said, you know what, we're gonna do this. We're gonna do it simple. We're gonna equalize everything. We're not gonna use any controversial bars. We're just gonna power bar, knee sleeves, walked out, biggest total wins all, biggest people we had. You know, and it kind of distilled down to 13 people who probably, you know, some should have been there. Some probably, they were just happy to be there.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And they were kind of incentivized. They were given cash to show up. I think they were all given like $1,000, you know, and it was a great performance. Zach ended up winning and stuff like that. But like, there were some great stories that came out of that. And now that like ABS is not even a federation. They're just unsanctioned meets that got great credibility, and they're allowed to be posted on Open Powerlifting. These guys are great. I've met them. They're just wonderful humans, and they're like doing meets in South Africa and Scotland. They're from Ireland, and they did some crazy stuff. Like they'll do a couple meets and stuff in Ireland and stuff. And but they've been swinging this hammer for like years now. It's like, hey, come over here. Like this bunch of crazy Irish guys. It's just trying to do something different, you know? And I think like at the end of the day, it's like they're trying to do, you know, they're trying to create storylines, approach. If you look at their stuff, they're just like, they're really putting a lot into this. And, you know, then you have Powerlifting United, who just kind of sprung up off of the WRPF, which they're, you know, the leadership there, which, you know, I'm ultimately affiliated with that thing. I'm a judge for that federation, but they're trying things different. They're trying to do things different. They're trying to create a more unified system in the, you know, try to bring the USAPL, if you will, to untested powerlifting, you know, create a regional system, create a funnel. So bring priority to nationals, bring a real nationals to like, untested powerlifting. Cause a lot of these, you know, they want to go to the ghost clashes and stuff like that. And they want to go to the American pros, but like, there really is no home for the average untested powerlifter, right? So give them their big meets, give them something to qualify for. You know, there's got to be the intermediate carrot, and so you have these two big players really, really, really trying to create this space and trying to do that. And I think that's really, really good for the untested side, because I do think right now is like tested's just carrying everything. So for instance, to that extent, like, you know, a lot of untested meets right now are just not filling up. They're like 15 lifters. So like PLU, you know, and this was started in the WRPF as well. But like the leadership essentially is like, we had proposed it that it's like, okay, why can't we have tested and untested lifters in the same meet? Why is that taboo? So why can't we have, if you have 15 untested lifters and 30 tested lifters, why can't they compete in the same meet? Why do they got to compete on 2 different days? Why can't we just lump them all together and they just have their own divisions? Because that's really all it is. Like a challenge. And it's like, we can do this. And they did it. So now you can still fill up meets, because the majority of the sport right now is really tested lifters. But then that untested space is still preserved. They get to do full meets. They don't get to feel like they're just 1 or 2 people, you know? Because like you think about like multiply meets, unless you're like in this area in like Ohio, certain parts of the world, but you go out toward me, you might get 1 multiply guy. That sucks. That feels horrible to just be the only person of your kind. Like I'm a single ply lifter by heart. Like I plan on ending my career in single ply, but you know, in the next couple of years, but
But that's still hard to find meats there.
Right.
Where you're
Because a lot of it is raw.
Yeah.
And I have to like, I'll probably talk to JP and be like, hey, can you add single ply to this so I can lift at it? You know, and so I'll do that. Right. Or I'll go to nationals or something to that effect because that's what they offer and stuff to that effect. But like, I just can't. It's weird because it's that isolation. You get disengaged from it. So you walk away from the sport because you can't do
Find
the
a
thing.
place.
You can't find your place because you feel alone.
Yeah.
Right. You can't go to this big multiply meet and there's multiply people everywhere. And you got, you know, squats, you know, squat being squat. And then you have like, you know, this 45-person meet that turns into a 60-person meet come bench. And you see an entire flight of benchers just bomb out because,
Yeah.
you know, everybody's shirt just didn't work that day.
Yeah.
You know, I miss those days. Those were so fun. But like, I think that's the difference because you have people rallying behind these concepts that like are doing, but they're producing different things. They're producing for the big guys who really don't do well on coefficient. They're producing total wins all, right? And that's the thing is on the tested side, you have people like you have like SBD. SBD is like, well, we got FU money. Let's just pay $40,000 to first place for Sheffield, and let's give everybody 12 grand per record broken. Right? That's not something that untested's ever seen, right? We don't have, well, we did. We won't talk about it, but like we don't have that big company stepping up, right? We don't have a company that's like, oh, like Nike broke the internet a couple days ago, whatever, when they had Danny Grigsby. Like they did a segment for Danny Grigsby pulling on their new Nike power bar. Because they got like, they're like, oh, I got the biggest deadlifter, you know, powerlifting deadlift world, like using their Nike power bar. And everyone's like, oh crap, Nike's looking at powerlifting. That's interesting.
Yeah.
But you think they're going to be looking at untested powerlifting?
No.
But they sure as hell looked at Danny Grigsby.
Yeah.
And he's untested. So that's interesting. So where their morals lie?
Well, how deep down that rabbit hole you want to be, you know, who makes the shoes?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. It's just like, hey, no one ever talks about this with strongman.
Yeah.
It's just strongest people. Don't ask questions. Don't ask. Just don't ask. Were drug tested? They tested. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. You reminded me of something where you're talking about the benchers bombing out, where there were a few meets that I ran and I was still competing at the time. I think it was a West Side Invitational, and I was a side judge for the bench for one of them. And, you know, I'm 300 pounds and, you know, just bending over in the chairs, you know, pain in the ass. And it was a light switch thing. And so I remember on the openers, it's like, God damn, you got to bend down, you know, to pick this thing up. And, you know, just sitting it on my lap, it was hot, you know, and all this other stuff. So after the first attempts and seeing that most people were missing, I just fucking flipped the thing on red and threw it on the ground. You know, that way it wasn't heating up. I out of this whole flight of say 28 lifters, I had to bend over fucking twice to pick it up to flip the switch to white, you know, because that's how common, you know, this shit was. And but it's that always, you know, is my memory of that, because it's, you know, it sucks to judge in the first place, you know, and from just the regard anyhow, you know, but that was one of those things to where it's like, what's the most optimal? Well, fuck, they're all bombing out anyhow. Just flip it all up. When going back after the storage shed, you know, where did your training move then?
You know, so we moved from the storage shed to powerlifting gyms started to kind of start becoming prevalent, right? They started cropping up, you know, like CrossFit boxes. So CrossFit boxes got really, really, really prominent. So it was that shift between, well, I'm not going to do Olympic lifting. I just want to do Olympic lifting. I don't want to go to, they kind of lost their, in my opinion, I think CrossFit kind of lost their morals when they found out that the athletes were not tested at all. So you started seeing these people, and again, it's American culture where it's like, oh, my heroes are Captain America. They're not Ted from down the street, right? They had super soldier serum and stuff, right? We always get to that point, and it's weird. But like, people started leaving CrossFit boxes. They didn't have anywhere to go, but they wanted to Olympic lift and they wanted to throw weight around, and some of them found strength found powerlifting in small sections of their cities and stuff. So we went to a place called, me and Al and everybody, we decided to go to a place called Stone and Barbell Club, which is a small little, what you would expect. It was a large truck engine bay or whatever, it's a garage, and we brought our equipment just like any nomadic powerlifting group is. We just load our box trucks up, and we bring our plates and bring our monoliths, and and we just infect a gym. And that's what we did, and we brought that over, and that was me and Al and a couple people, and then from there, we kind of needed to build, like, we lost some of our crew, right? And we kind of built up and stuff. So I was still going to a Gold's Gym down the road, and I ran, again, that's where I ran into Jeff, right? And I was running the crew, right? Al was gone. So I was running the crew, making sure people were good, going to meets, handling people, jacking people's shirts. I was never in multiply, but I knew it better than most. Completely disregard that I'm probably one of the best knee wrappers in the world at this point, because Al is a sadist, right? He's like, tighter. And I'm like, I can only pull these TP 5000 so tight, Al. What is wrong with you? And, so I have that. And then, I find Jeff at a Gold's Gym, and I'm like, come train with me. And then, like, we just started having some people funnel in. We had some ladies funnel in, because it was really the only place, like, in our part of town that really did have something. And our new crew was basically effectively born at that point, right? We had about 15, 20 people. We're all raw lifters, all throwing around weight, and I'm just kind of, they're all looking at me for a plan. What the hell I was doing? This is like 2007, something like that. Like, didn't have a plan. I was like, okay, cool. Like, let me just put something together, right? And I'm taking stuff, like, I'm looking at, like, one person. I'm like, well, 5-3-1 will work for you, and I'm like looking at that and doing like a haphazard version of 5-3-1 and putting it on a thing and printing it off for them and stuff, and monitoring their progress. And then another person, giving them like a base linear periodization, thing. And I'm just calling people's numbers, and I'm just sitting here, I'm in the middle of the thing. And of course I'm doing my own training, but it just kind of grew from there. And then we're all traveling the meets together, and, it's our crew versus the St. Louis crew at the time. And that was a whole group of guys and stuff. And Al was still competing, and, in that point. So we go to like XPC, and that was like, or go to the Olympia or something to that effect. I remember, that was a big thing. He went to the Olympia and blew out his suit the first time, scared everybody. Like, it just sounded like a gunshot went off. He goes down with like 744, boom. And then he puts on, a girl named Becky Rich. She was like one of the original 123ers in the sport, just super strong. She's like 123 pounds, tiny, and like puts on her suit and squats his third attempt. It's just like, it was just a different time. But like, we grew our crew, and we stayed pretty loyal to that for a number of years. And then from there, that crew, we kind of broke up, right? And it kind of goes back to, when people get big, personalities get big, and this.
Yeah.
People get big, they start going different directions, stuff like that. So, Jeff was getting pretty big in his own space, and I think like one of the greatest things, he'll laugh about it too. And if he listens to this, he's gonna chuckle a little bit. But like, him and I were like, after he squatted 877, he was like, "Oh, squat 9." I go, "I think you need to give me 9 months." He goes, "No, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it in 8 weeks." He had just done a meet, squat 877. He was going to, 8 weeks later in January, he was going to do it at the American Open. It was just a big expo meet. I'm like, "Nope, I ain't going to do it." He's like, "Screw you, I'll do it anyway." Goes to the American Open and gets buried under 804. Right. And him and I, like, we're good and we're great friends. And I'm so proud of him, because he He's the powerlifting coach at Ottawa University. He's a head coach there.
Oh, cool.
And you know, he's incredible. He's doing nice coaching world record holders in the IPF. He's going to Malta and stuff. So I'm so proud of him. But like, you know, our crew kind of broke up, and then so that's when we started to link up. We knew JP and stuff like that. The first time I met JP, he came to Stone and Barbell Club with Paul Carter,
Mm-hmm.
and he's off in the corner doing rack pulls, and then like he does a local meet there, and he's like wrapping knees and stuff, and we're like, God, you're terrible. Like we made him feel so bad for wrapping knees. It's like I remember my first beer, so you know, and we knew his original training partner Ben. Right. So we had a good community there. So we knew that. So when we kind of like broke up from that area, you know, Al left, he went in retirement, and we had a bunch of stuff like that. We all just kind of conglomerated together up north at Ben and JP's gym. And it's kind of been like that ever since. Now, fast forward to today, like our crew got big. It got like 50 something people. And at one time, like I was coaching the majority of people for free. I wasn't taking any money.
Yeah.
I didn't start taking money till 2020, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was just like, this is what you do. You're the guy who knows the most in the gym, so you're the one that gives out the program to the crew.
Well, yeah, you have another job at the same time.
Right.
Right. So,
right. There was no powerlifting coach back at that time. And, you know, JP, like during his thing, and like, I'll never claim coaching JP, but like, we showed up on Squat Sunday. He's like, what am I doing today? And I'm like, well, I think we need to do 881 for a double. You think? He's like, we did 820 last week. He's like, yeah, that sounds good. Right. You know, and he's like, hey, I think I want to bench 611 today. I'm like, no, I think 595 is good. I said, we stopped there. He goes 611. He misses it. I get pissed. I go throwing my keys across the room. I leave the gym because it's like, I told you so, you know, and he tries to call me like, hey man, I'm sorry, and stuff like that. Leaves a message like, I'm sorry, I didn't, you know, and I'm like, I send you the voicemail.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, but like, that was just, to me, that was just being a training partner and a person like investing in that. And so we're kind of all in that space for a really long time. Right. And so we became the old dogs, and we had all these young people and like I said, 50 people. And that's how, you know, we grew. And in a weird way, that's how SBC was born. Right? SBC, and JP will tell you, like SBC was born off of like the love of powerlifting in terms of just people loving the sport. We ran meets, we helped out, we got equipment through voluntary effort and stuff like that. We were all in on it, stuff like that. So like, you know, where it is today, anyone who had a hand on it can be so proud of like what it's grown. And so like for me, I train there still and stuff. Like I train at SBC still and stuff. And I'm one of the, probably me and JP is probably really the only OGs really left of our original crew. But it's just like, I remember it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first combo rack that we got. I remember the first set of kilo plates we got. Like the blue combo rack that we have in there. It's funny because we talk about it. It's an ER rack and we just kind of laugh at it. We're like, that thing's held up better than anything.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's just like, it's, you know, we get these ghost racks and stuff like that. And they're the newer ones. And they're just like, man, can't mess with success. Can you? Can't just, I mean, there's just something about a piece of white bread that just, that you can't mimic it. Right. So it's one of those types of things. So that like our crew, we just kind of migrated. And again, SBC is the only powerlifting gym in the city, really, that's like really dedicated. But boy, do we have a history of popping out horses out of that gym. We always have. Since JP, Jeff, Al, we've carried that legacy on for years. And that's just kind of like, that's the story that like I've considered. We have a new guy. His name is Devontae. He's never competed before, Dave. Never. He played college football. Big dude. But took 765 for a set of 6 on squat. Bench 620 for a double. Can't deadlift worth crap. He's never deadlifted. But he can double overhand 620. Just grab it and just manhandle it up. He's like, I don't know if I'm going to compete. So we're all just kind of like, he's like, what are you gonna coach me? I'm like, I guess. But like, that's just the way that's been. ever since I've been there. Hunter Henderson came along. It's like JP founder and stuff like that in a Gold's Gym. It's like, I know this girl. She squats like 315 for 5. Rest is history with her.
Mhm.
She's on the Olympia stage.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a number of people that's just kind of come through there. And we just never deviated from it. We find the next person, that person comes walking through the door, and it's just like, guess this just keeps happening.
The equipment thing that you said kind of cracks me up, because when we first started supplying equipment, one of the things that I could never wrap my head around is, because at Westside we had the power racks were the 2x2 power racks,
Right.
with, all the holes. And I mean, they were used by all-time world record holders. I mean, we beat the fuck out of those things, like 3 of them. And I could not understand why in the fuck anybody would ever want anything more than that. Like, no, this is all we ever have to sell. We don't need to sell all the other stuff, because these are the strongest fuckers in the world that are beating the absolute shit out of this thing. I don't understand. And then it was, I did a consulting thing for a Division I university.
Right.
Right. And I remember walking into the weight room like, oh my God, because it's, the murals and, the racks and the custom logos and all this other kind of stuff. And I remember actually telling the coach, like, this looks great, but what you really need is like another room off the side of this with like 2x2 racks, fucking glued ham raise, pull down machine, where you get the real training done. I'm like, I don't understand all this.
Mm-hmm.
And then he told me, he's like, Dave, you got to understand that this is also for recruiting. When we bring these athletes, that was like a light bulb that went off in my head, because they're like, oh, okay, now I get it. And I also understand why gyms would need it, because when somebody walks in, the first thing they're going to see, what they draw their eye to, it's probably going to be the power racks, because they're the biggest thing.
Right.
And if it's got the gym's logo and custom branding on that, then the perceived value is going to be. So it changed my perception entirely. But there was a period, man, probably like 10 years of my life, I'm like, all this stuff is bullshit. This just gets the job done.
Right.
But I didn't see the upside of any of the other stuff. But it does get the job done.
Right.
If it's just your basic 2x2 rack with,
right.
A fuck ton of holes for pin presses and shit like that, or a squat stands,
right.
It's funny the perceptions people will have with Westside with a lot of the things, because the first 5 years I was there, we didn't have a monolift. The only reason we got the monolift is because it started to be used in all the competitions we went to. We didn't know what the fuck we were doing.
Yeah.
Right. And then because of that, we realized when we started using it more and more, we are losing core stability, because you're not walking it out.
Mm-hmm.
So then we had to add in things like pull down abs and more reverse hypers to be able to help develop the core. It comes from, you see what's going on.
Right.
And then like the chains and the band is like, dude, I was there for 4 years before we had chains, and we had chains for a couple of years before bands came in. So if you want to replicate this, like 4 years of not actually my own training, there's 14 years, of none of that. Then you progress and you progress and you go on to there. With your training and coaching, how would you define your coaching philosophy?
Everything works.
And then how has that changed over time?
Everything works.
Yeah.
In the right context. Conjugate works for raw when applied in the right context.
Yeah.
I would say probably the only thing I'm on this holy crusade that reverse bands are stupid.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just me, because I think there are more fundamental ways. So for me, my programming, everything, when I was early on, the world was wide open. There was always the next thing, the new toy, everything was
that's a
out.
bold statement though, man, because you come from you've come from a lineage that came out of Hussey's gym.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's dig into this.
Pick a weight.
Yeah.
Pick a weight you want to hit at a meet, and you got 12 months to get the depth, or 12 weeks to get the depth.
Yeah.
Right. So with that said, by any means necessary. And I used a lot of reverse bands, but as we evolved into this raw space, I found out people were incredibly scared of the hole, and it wasn't solving any issue. Like there was
compounding it.
It was making it worse.
Yeah.
I was coaching people. I was like, yeah, you need reverse bands. That's gonna, you know, you're gonna feel 600 at the top, and then it's gonna be 450 in a hole, and you're gonna explode up and stuff like that. And then they go to the meet and they just like get under 600 and go, and they're just done. So I started, I was like, okay, what else can I do? Can I do like Anderson squats, pin squats? Well, that changes the dynamic a little bit. But I started gravitating toward like other forms of accommodating resistance. That's when I started looking at chain and things like that. And it's kind of like over time, like I started understanding the tool and I started understanding the context. You know, why do we use a Smith machine for bench press, or why do you use a Smith machine for an incline or something to that effect? It keeps us in a optimal position, right? It kind of keeps us on rails. It keeps us on rails a little bit, right? Reverse bands are really no different. I think reverse bands have their place when learning a heavier weight to help us reinforce technique, right?
Or confidence.
Yeah. I think the majority of big lifters who really benefit from it don't need that confidence. What they need is they need stability, and they need understanding and acclimation of a weight. If you look at Olympic lifting, they hit those numbers, they hit those big numbers and stuff like that, and they hit those front squats because they're becoming acclimated to the weight, right? And I've always found that like chains provide a much more superior load pattern to that, and it produces a better, in my opinion, since chains don't store potential energy. Like it doesn't store the energy the same way that like a band does. It's just dead weight. So when that hits, it's like you just have dead weight. That dead weight, it feels more representative than a band ever could. And it's not really controlling you as much as a chain will. So I find like chains with all the lifters that I've worked with Zach, JP, Ben Moore, Jeff Frank, these big guys that's throwing around 800 plus pound squats, a number of, you know, things like that. The bands seem to just kind of take their technique out of it. And I need that technique, right? I need them to be a little shaky. I need them to walk out weight and stuff like that. So we were doing walkout predominantly and things like that. The effects of that, in my opinion, is that, so for instance, to put a case in point, is 80% of the people at Powerlifting United Nationals this weekend, of like I think it was like 500 people was there, 20% of the people used the monolift. 80% walked out, right? That 80% of those people could not use bands because they don't have a monolift.
Yeah.
Or they don't have they probably have a combo rack. They're probably lifting out of a combo rack or a power rack. They could probably use a power rack, but the setup's even weird if you're walking out. Right. And then you have bands that get uneven unless you have a consistent set of your own bands. They can be uneven, and it can be an uneven loading pattern. Chains are a little bit easier. And I found like most of my clients, when they had access to chains, they had access to bands, they had access, or vice versa. So I found that from the swath of accessibility to ease of setup and execution and efficacy of what I was trying to accomplish, whether it be stability, whether it be confidence and overload, or anything like that, like chains just were superior, and they just kind of checked the checkbox a little bit greener than those. Now, that's not to say that like, but it's just like it got wild. Like when you see it was like it got really wild. People would do board press with reverse bands, and I'm like, what are you doing? Or you're doing chain, like people would just like, they would just seem like more is less. It's like distill it down. So my coaching, I became less of a student and more of a master of understanding is, okay, these are the contexts in which I'm going to use this particular movement, right? I know chains are going to work in my stability blocks. So if I have a person walking out, I might do swinging chain. I did that for my single ply training. Like I think I did 881 at the top, and it was 770 in the hole. And I unrack out of a combo rack that stuff, that chain's off the ground, and I'm walking out 881, and that shit's just doing this, and I have to settle before that stuff is. I don't have people grabbing it. Yeah. You know, just like Jeff and JP, like, let it settle, because if I go, when that stuff's just swinging. So it's just, it's learning patience and time. So bands won't particularly do that. If I would unrack that with a reverse band, it's just going to keep me tight.
Mm-hmm.
It's truly not going to challenge my stability. It's actually going to make me tighter.
Yeah.
So I found that like those little deviations between the two, and you could say that I'm splitting hairs, and you might be right. But the reality of it is I just found a sharper knife to cut with, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
We're still achieving the same thing. It's just, this just seems to be a bit more effective. And so,
yeah. So when you lay out blocks, how are they typically going to lay out? Because you said a stability block. So if
mm-hmm.
you're working with somebody and they have 9 months to a month or to
Right.
a meet, you know, what does that look like?
Let's talk about Heidi's meet prep. You want to talk about it?
We'll do that.
So Heidi competes in December 7th, right? First raw meet in a long time. And so her first 12 weeks out. So the first block was in work capacity to intensity block. In other words, we worked a lot of volume up into intensity, but like her accommodating resistance or dynamic days that we would work, like so with bench or stuff like that, would be very focused on just explosive potential and adding some volume and stuff like that. So pretty much very, very vanilla block period or linear periodization. Her second block, which is this block she's wrapping up, is a stability block. And it's meant to kind of challenge her entire state of being about max capacity and load. So at 5 weeks out, I'll have her 80 pounds of chain, a little bit of a deload week. You know, can have her 80 pound chain, kind of learn the pattern, learn the setup and stuff like that. But at 8 weeks out,
that swinging chain.
It could be swinging chain, but she's going to be out of mono, so we didn't need it. I just need to be completely loaded off, right?
Yeah.
So loaded off the ground, so it's going to completely deload in the hole, but it's going to be that. So I needed her, you know, really overloading in the hole. So I need to be, you know, I needed to be like 450 at the top, but 370 in the hole, right? I really need to go through the entire range of gamut of it. So, and I don't want it balled up or anything like that. So at 8 weeks out, I'll have her like 80 pounds of chain. Give me a top double at RP, whatever, you know, like RP 8, RP 9, right? Give me a close to max double, and then give me that same weight again for a single, right? Because one thing Heidi's wrestling with right now is depth. Depth's not coming easy for her, which is really interesting, right? Is it interesting? I don't know. We'll have to see. So, but with that week, we start transitioning to more straight weight, right? So we overload for that week, really hit something really heavy. I think her top end was like 460. She had 380 with 80 pounds of chain, right? And then the next week I pull some of the chain off and go like 40 or 60 pounds of chain. Same premise, same rep scheme.
Weight go up.
Weight goes up. Yeah. Straight weight goes up. Chain weight goes down.
Yeah.
At 6 weeks out, work up to a heavy straight weight, and then throw on the chain. So give me a single at that heavy straight weight, whether it be like 405, whatever, and then throw the 40 pounds of chain on. Guess what? I just found your 90%. We're ready to peak. So deload at 5, 3 or 4, 3, 2. Find your possible opener. Plant that stake. 3 weeks out, plant that stake. Realize your opener. Find your possible second. 2 weeks out, hit your opener. Hit your second. Meet week, right? Pretty simple. And the thing we'll use chains and stuff like that. If she needs to have a little bit of overload, we may use chains like an additional. So for her, about 10%. 10% total weight in accommodating resistance, right? Because 10% is all we really need to play with, right? My philosophy on a lot of that is at 6 weeks out, I need to know where you're training. I need to validate your training max. So I need to know your 90% because I can spend 5 weeks validating 10. So if I know that you're not so for instance with Zach, right? If I know his 90% is 804, guess what? I can validate that his top end is 881. Pretty simply.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I just need to know what the opener is. Then I can go from there. I can spend time honing that in and using accommodating resistance and stuff to get, hey, there's nothing you're going to touch on meet day that you have not already touched in some way, shape, or form. Same thing with Heidi. So as she goes into this, so she'll be 5 weeks out. She'll be 5 weeks out next week. She just pulled this week. She did some deadlifting last night. But then same thing with bench, right? She may use chain. She may use two board or something to that effect, but some sort of like that's going to help her push more weight or something to that effect. And said we effectively use chains for squat because she was a little bit scared of the hole, at least below parallel, because she just like stops.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, I got to take some weight off in the hole, but she could accelerate powerfully, powerful, like up through it. So that period of that block thing is just like, okay, cool. At 5 weeks out, now I know where I can go. And then so we use chain on those like accumulation like sets where it's like, hey, your opener is say 370. Now throw on 40 pounds of chain and hammer that. And what does that look like? Rather than take her straight there and like put her in a space where she's not quite ready yet. She's not quite ready to be baked to that level yet. So I'm going to wait a week and I'm going to swap that chain for straight weight. So I may take her 370 to 410, right? The next week. So I use it as a gateway to feel it, but not like expose her to it entirely. So that's how I kind of use chain and stuff like that. And then that deviates a little bit from lifter to lifter, but I'm treating her like a new lifter who's an intermediate lifter who knows these principles really well. You know, she's one of the queens of Westside Barbell. Her name's on the board. It'll be forever on the board. She knows her shit. So she understands this stuff. It's a challenge to her.
Well, there's a big difference between multiply and raw.
Huge.
You know, so just how do you approach the technical differences? So mainly with the squat, because it's probably going to be more so there than anything else.
So for her, that was interesting. So she was her squat was great. First that we started working on it and stuff, it's the quintessential back. That butt just shoots straight back. I'm like, oh dear, this ain't Tijuana. This is no show at Tijuana. And I was like, you need to open up. I was like, I need your brace and I need you to let the chest drop, because she was up and back, right? She's ready to take 700 just straight up high bar and just go straight down with it and just go back, as opposed to ribs down, drop the chest, brace in, push the hips back just a tad, open the hips, drive the knees forward. Everything that you were told not to do in multiply. And she's like, this is so scary. I go, don't worry, it'll be fine. So we're still battling that point, because she's like, I feel like I'm ass to grass. I was like, you're parallel at best. I said, and every judge that I've ever trained that's come through my thing is going to throw you a red light and it's going to be a bloodbath for you. I said, I don't want you to bomb out. And I said, I won't ever put you in a position to bomb out. But the reality of it is that I need more. And she's like, man, this is so different. I go, welcome to a whole nother side of powerlifting. So you hear her talking about it, you hear her talk about it on our post or whatever. She's like, this is a challenge. This is different. And I'm like, it is. And no one cares who you are here. No one cares. Like, now they care about people. Of course, they care about the John Hacks and stuff like that. But, you know, your squat depth and stuff like that, people are going to look at you like, you know, that's why when she decided, I was like, why don't you just sign up for a meet, get a casual 500 dots, pro total for a raw thing. So you can do that pretty easily. Because that was her thing. She was just like, I don't know what to do next. And I was like, I don't know. Do what makes you happy. If it's throwing up 225 and saying, yep, curl still got it, that's powerlifting to you. But if you feel like you want to get on a platform, you want to try something new, something like that, it's like, have a carrot on a stick, do a meet, go somewhere no one knows your name. I was like, come to Kansas City. I said, we do great meets. They're done well, they're ran well, they're consistent. It's a new environment. No one's going to know your name. They're going to know that you're with me, but there'll be no pressure. I was like, you get the opportunity to be a brand new lifter again. I said, think about that. And that's interesting. How do you take the best in the world and you turn them into a brand new ever again? It's crazy to think about.
Well, it's a good thing too, because one of the things that I've seen with lifters that have been at the top level for a long period of time is powerlifting's a bubble to begin with, but then you become in a bubble,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the only people then you're really around are people at the top meets at
Right.
the highest level. And done for a long enough period of time, they begin to kind of forget why they got in it in the first place, right? And then if you can get some of them, especially when they start to see behind the curtain, like the Wizard of Oz thing,
Yeah.
then it becomes even more diluted. If you can get them to just go to a normal local meet and watch that person, you know, that just battled cancer pull 315 for the first time or squat and see, you know, in them, you know, why, like what your first meet PR was like,
Right.
you know, it brings it all back of this is why I'm doing this. This is the extreme of that, right? Because now you're taking somebody that's been at that high level, you know, pound for pound for a long period of time,
Mm-hmm.
strongest multiply across the board. You know, I think maybe even higher than Hoff, you know.
Yeah, she's up there.
I mean, it was way up there. And now you're going to compete, you know, with mortals, I guess is what you want to say.
Yeah.
But in such a way that everything that she's going to do is going to be like the first PRs that she ever made.
Right.
You know, which is a second life, you know, and in a sport that she loved to begin with, but may have fell out of love with it.
Right.
You know, for multitude of reasons over a period of time, which normally when we see people that enter that phase, they'll leave the sport. They're never a part of the sport. They become disgruntled with the sport, you know, in some cases hate the sport.
Right.
Right. And all for the wrong reasons.
Yes.
Because they forgot why they got in it and what they, you know, got kind of what we were talking about before,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and now that can reignite that, you know, on a whole different level. So it's going to be really fun to watch.
It will. Because
now she's competitive as fuck, you know, so that adds a different element to this as well.
You're telling me. She's incredibly competitive against herself. I mean, to a crazy degree, because I think at the end of the day, it's like, I'll never claim coaching her. She's my partner. Like I don't, and I won't ever claim that position because I claim another position. She knows this and I help her. Right. But at the end of the day, it's like, I need to be able to support in those areas and stuff like that. But when she has a bad day, she's like, this just sucks. She's like, I should do better. I should be able to hit depth. Like, we were working on depth last night and she's just like, this is stupid. And I'm like, it's not, we just got to do better. Right. And I'll help you. And we're going to continue to do it, continue to work on it. And, you know, and it's one of those things where she's got to get out of her head. And at the same time, and she is mortal. What's crazy is she is mortal. She gets to be a mortal again because let's talk about the numbers, right? She's not, you know, big kid on the block. The squat record's 496. It's going to be broken by a French girl in the IPF. She's going to squat over 500 at Sheffield probably. Or Sheffield's 12 weeks out. She took 496 for a double at 148 in a pair of SPD knee sleeves. And if you saw her squat technique, you'd be like, how? Her knees are her knees are touching. She pulls over 5. She benches in the mid 2s. And she doesn't, you look at her, it's like, how do you power lift? She doesn't look like she power lifts. But then you look at Heidi, it's like, you're born to do this shit, right? This is reason why you ended up where you are. Like, in the moment you touched a barbell, people was like, I can do stuff with that, you know? And, you know, she's always been one of my favorite lifters to ever watch. I've always been a fan of hers and stuff. And, so I think at the end of the day, it's like having this rare opportunity to kind of do this space with her and kind of help her out in it and like show her this side of the sport, because that's what it was. Like, we met at the women's pro-am. Like I said, I promise you, because she was like, this is all she's like, I'm just used to like Ohio powerlifting and stuff like that. She was like, this is different. Because it was the first year I went to the pro-am and I was like, this all feels different to me. This isn't the powerlifting that I know. She's like, well, this is all I know. And I was like, I promise you I can show you something different. And I promise you, like, you're going to be like, I don't feel like I know this sport at all. And so I took her out to a meet in Las Vegas. And she's like, holy crap. She's like, are all meats this different? I go, this is just the untested side. I was like, go to USAPL Nationals. I was like, I'll take you to that next year. I was like, and you want to talk about production level? We talk about LED walls 30 feet high across the entire thing. You talk about Sheffield. You know, Sheffield's in a big concert hall. It's sold out in 3 minutes at like $150 a ticket in England, in Sheffield, England. Not to mention that it's on a big concert hall and stuff like that, and it's, you know, have big things and production to it and all this other stuff. It's just like, that's interesting. This actually feels like a pro sport. It just doesn't feel like a glorified local meet in a section of the Arnold.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And don't get me wrong, that's all we know. But when you enter these other arenas and these other things, it's like, holy cow, this is not the same. So, you know, Nationals was a little bit different. I took her to Nationals with me, and she was like, this is a lot different. She was in the warm-up room with me and stuff, and she was talking to some of these people. And you're right. It goes back to the people. And that's why, like, the coaching I do is all focused around people and stuff like that. Like, your numbers and stuff like that will come, and we'll take those as they come. But like, I impressed onto her is like, this is about the people and their stories and their journeys and what it is. It's like a person's 300-pound squat might as well be an 800-pound squat. And some people will dog on their numbers and dog on their perceptions and stuff. I have one client, she's incredibly neurotic, and I had to explain to her, she benched 285. And she's like, that's not crap. I'm a crap lifter. She pulls over 500, squats in the mid fours. And I was like, let me just draw some perspective here for you. And I pulled up a 285-pound bench and found the number on open powerlifting. And I found the equivalency of a man, right? Same number, same placing and stuff like that. It's like 573. I was like, if you were a man in the same equivalency, it's the equivalent of benching 573 as a guy. And I don't care who you are. If you bench 573, you are a god amongst men in this sport. You're like, whoa, that's a big bench. You know, a 500-pound bench is legendary by all right still. Like, yeah, that puts you in the pantheon of like, you're good at this. You're real good at this, right? And so you get that perspective. And so I try to do that for a lot of people. Like, and a lot of my lifters are like, what's this for? It's like, am I really good at this? I'm like, you're better than what you think, right? You know, for her, she's like, I suck at this. I'm like, there are tens of people better. There are tens of thousands of people worse than you. Like, but she wants to be Kobe Bryant at where she's at. You know, she was in that upper echelon of Jordan, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James in multiply, right? She's in that category of lifter. Here she's, I don't know, some person on the bench.
Yeah.
Right.
Starting.
Yeah. She's not quite. Yeah. She comes in after the first round, her first rotation, subs in, you know, but she'll get there. And she'll get there and she'll come upward and stuff. And I think that, like, she shares that mentality that a lot of my big lifters have. And I have quite an influx of, it's been weird because I've had quite an influx of like bigger lifters start coming into my stable. More than Zach, more than, you know, other lifters that I've had, you know, come through, and they're all looking to do Ghost Clash or the American Pro or something to that effect. And they're all kind of the same mindset that if they're not doing, you know, the most legendary things possible, then they're just a failure. There's no in between, right? They're not close to the world record, or they're not pushing things, or, you know, whatever, you know, but understanding that sometimes you just have to put it all together, and it can't just all be, you know, there's competition to this. So at Nationals this past weekend, my client, James Dahlman, he, lost by 1 dot point. by Kirk Sabalka, Ohio native, owns Pinnacle in Columbus, I believe. But Kirk is known just kind of being consistent. He was sixth place going into his last deadlift. James had a stellar day. He was 7 for 8 on his last deadlift, right? And I changed his last deadlift to kind of like seal the win.
Mm-hmm.
So when they said bars loaded, I look at lifting cast, and Kirk had changed his attempt to 804. He was going to go from 6th to 1st. So he's going to pull for the win. And guess what? He did. He pulled for the win. He won. Beat James by the thing. And I'm like sitting here looking like a failure. James calls me yesterday. He's like, it just hurts. It stings. You know, he's going to take time off to be a dad and stuff like that. And he's just like, I was like, man, don't trust me. I was like, I feel like a failure. I was like, I let you down. I was like, I didn't see that coming. I said, but that's powerlifting, man.
Mm-hmm.
That's competitive powerlifting. Sometimes you just do it. Like he had like 40 pounds on you. I was like, now we can get back to work and make sure that that deadlift is never like that ever again. But same mentality, you know, that same competitor's mentality, right? It's just there and it burns and it's always burning. And you can't turn it off.
Yeah.
She's going to show up that local meet and she's just going to be like, I better win best lifter. Like, it doesn't matter. It's a local meet.
Yeah.
You're going to be going up against, you know, Glenda, who's 65 years old with a hip replacement, hoping she squats to depth,
Mm-hmm.
you know, with 125 pounds. Read the room, sweetheart.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Before we wrap this up, do you have any final thoughts?
You know, I always thought about being on this podcast, and, you know, I think probably one of the biggest thoughts I have ultimately is just a genuine thank you to you. As a person who's kind of been in this sport for a long time, you know, and I've seen a lot of different things. What you have done and what Elite FTS has done, and a lot of people don't understand that, is that has shaped powerlifting in a way that few can appreciate. Much in the same way you have a lot of things that just kind of happen, right? Everything from, you know, what we facilitated and what's been facilitated, what has grown and stuff like that, and transferring knowledge and stuff. A lot of things are just not possible. This current generation may not see it, but they feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And as a person who's been through that, and all of that, you know, I can confidently say on behalf of an entire generation of powerlifters and coaches and judges and people at the top of federations, thank you for all that you do. Thank you for what you have done. Thank you for your contributions. And thank you for allowing me to speak.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
What's the best way people can get a hold of you?
Well, you can get a hold of me on my Instagram, MJ Greeno on Instagram. That's pretty much there. And if you need to call me, just tell me and I'll give you my phone number.
All right. We'll put a link in the bio. Thank you again for coming out. And guys, we're done.
Thank you.